Have you? Do you legitimately?
Thank you, Zecca.
Jessica, we're good to go.
Right.
Fantastic. Executive Director Ross, ready to go? Yeah. All right, then I will go ahead and call this meeting to order at 9:02. And Executive Director Ross, can you take roll, please?
Thank you, President Kapoor. Vice President Haley,
President.
Superintendent Horn. Here. Member Cat Means. Member Clark,
Here.
Dr. Clay,
Here.
Dr. Hagerman. Here. Member Kripkus,
Here.
Member Meyerson,
Here.
Dr. Robbins,
Present.
Dr. Kapoor, you have a quorum.
Thank you so very much. And on to our agenda for today, business reports. I have no reports as president, and we'll move right on to superintendent. Your report, please, superintendent.
As the superintendent, I also serve on the Board of Regents. And last week, there was a Board of Regents meeting at the University of Arizona. And with Dr. Robbins here, I should say, the University of Arizona is a terrific university. One of my daughters went there. But the interesting thing about the meeting was the head of the Diversity, etc. Program looked right at me before she said what she had to say, which was that if people accuse what she's doing as ideology, that's just because we have an ideology. And I didn't say anything because as here, you don't respond there. But what I thought was, if expecting teachers to teach academics objectively, or if they introduce a controversial subject, present all sides so that students can make up their own minds, rather than a teacher abusing their position by pushing their own ideology on a captive audience. If that's an ideology, I plead guilty to it.
Thank you, superintendent. Executive director's report. Director Ross.
Thank you, Dr. Kapoor, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. As you know, I've been using the executive director's report to spotlight staff members of the board staff who do an amazing job putting things together, not only for these meetings, but all of the great work of the board. I'm super excited today because it connects to one of the agenda items to spotlight Kat Ruiz, who's over to my right, and Lucinda Flores. They are our team that handles not only ESA appeals, but ESA emails, and all of the great work that goes into the board's side of that initiative, and then other work as well, but in particular that work which is relevant today. Kat has and Lucinda have helped with the inclusion of over the thousands of pages of emails and summarizing, items for you all to better absorb the feedback that's received. And we just so thankful for both of them. In particular, a great example is Kat put a redlining version of the draft together for board members, which was very kind. And they are definitely deserving of praise. And I just want to make sure that they get a nice little shout out.
Fantastic, thank you. And certainly speaking for members of the board, we would echo those sentiments and very much appreciated. Congratulations. So I'll move us on to item 2, which is the call to the public. This is the time, obviously, for the public to comment. Members of the board may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda. Therefore, pursuant to state statute, Action taken as a result of public comment will be limited to directing staff to study the matter, responding to any criticism, scheduling the matter for further consideration, discussion at a later time. Director Ross, have we received any requests to speak?
Dr. Ford, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, we have, up first will be Andrea McIntosh, followed by Angela Faber, and then Wendy Mahler.
Fantastic. And once again, given the number of folks wishing to speak to us, I would once again ask you to limit your comments to 2 minutes, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm very concerned over the ADE, specifically the ESA department, not following laws. I asked to speak independently on this topic and present the information to the board. However, I was told that was not possible as a member of the public. I will summarize briefly. ARS 15-2403 J is not being followed by ESA department. I know of multiple parents who have advertised that with only a medical evaluation from years past, they have been able to get a new contract and gain higher funding levels. That is not how the law was written. And I really feel this needs to be looked into. And Superintendent Horn, respectfully, I ask that you please have this looked into because it's happening and it's not okay. It is wasting taxpayer dollars. Those evaluations that are medical do not determine that there is an educational need. They determine that there is a medical diagnosis. A medical diagnosis and an educational diagnosis are two different things. The other thing I'm concerned with is the application process. It doesn't affect me or my son because he is the traditional, the legacy application. He has been on ESA and he will remain on ESA until we decide different. He will stay in that category of not universal. However, if you go onto the website and you try to apply for ESA, they have military families who fall under the previous category. Under ARS 15-2401.01, it specifically says that there is universal, and then there is if you are not otherwise qualified. And I ask that this be looked into.
Thank you.
Also, since I'm not going to be able to speak again, please reject the handbook because it is full of many errors and it is not within the limits of the law.
Thank you.
Dr. Ford, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Andrea Faber, followed by Wendy.
Good morning. Thanks for allowing me to speak. Mine is also an observation on the application process that's currently being on the website. There are only 3 options to choose from: universal, universal with a disability, and preschool with a disability. And all the other categories, legal categories, are subcategorized underneath those. So you only have 3 options to choose from, even though you should have the option of all the others. So I'd like to know, why are all the eligibility categories that are in law not reflected on the current application choices to sign up under? And also, will the 13,000 students prior to universal still be categorized as their original categories when they signed up for the ESA under their original? Will that be broken down individually on the quarterly report and show all those different categories instead of just the 3 that are listed now? So I would like you all to look at that also. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Dr. Ford, Superintendent Horn. Up next is Wendy.
Good morning, my name is Wendy Mahler. Good morning, Superintendent Horn, Board, and Cabinet. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm a parent of a public school student He's a senior this year, and he'll be graduating in May. And when he was entering kindergarten, I researched and toured schools and charter schools in my area that I thought would give him the best education. I'm grateful that I was not bound to our home school based on our address, but I was able to enroll him in my same school district, but in another school. Today, if my son were younger, I would consider using an ESA. Why? Not because the ESA is now available, but because of the drastic change in the educational curriculum and family proficiency scores over the more recent years. However, I digress. The Empowerment Scholarship is just that. It empowers parents who so choose to have the opportunity to find alternative education options, no matter the amount of money they make, no matter their zip code or their school district. The ESA program is more equitable for all Arizona students and families. The ESA opens up opportunities to educational choice and freedom to best fit the needs of the child. I am so relieved that there is a scholarship program like this so parents can have this option. I also think the ESA program will create competition and academic excellence, which will be a benefit for all Arizona students. I've been hearing praises about the ESA program, that it has enriched our children's education. Parents are reporting to me that they are happy with the communication from the ESA director, which has been frequent and forthcoming, that the extended phone line hours are very appreciated, that the reimbursement process has been seamless, and most of all, that the opportunities and access to good curriculum, especially in science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, has been life-changing. These parents are grateful for the ESA program, as am I, even though I will not be participating in it. The ESA law is a shining example, and I'm proud that Arizona is a champion for all students.
Thank you and congratulations to your son.
Dr. Cork, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, that concludes this call for the month.
Thank you very much. Then I'll move us on to agenda item 3, the consent agenda. We have removed item B. Is that right, Executive Director Ross?
That is correct, Dr. Cork. Item B has been removed.
Fantastic. Then I would ask if any member of the board would like any other item removed from the consent agenda for a conversation, or if we can take them as a group.
Dr. Cork, my apologies. Item C has been removed as well. Both of these schools have updated their Governor General's office, indicating that we can remove them from this month's agenda.
That is a good news story. Good. Okay. So the consent agenda is item A, D, and E. Would anyone like any of those 3 items removed? Hearing and seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
I'm going to go to Dr. Robbins and Dr. Clay. You okay with a second of that? Very good. Any conversation? There we go. I see my folks remotely with their camera on. Thank you. So all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign? Okay, consent agenda passes. We'll move on to item 4, the call to the public. Once again, given the number of folks who would like to chat with us today, I would ask that you confine your comments to 2 minutes. Executive Director Ross, do we have some folks who want to chat with us?
Dr. Cork, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. First will be Susanna Anderson, followed by Michaela Jones Dillabaugh, and then Stacy Brown.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. I truly appreciate the chance to come and give our opinion every month. I have not much to say. I continue to be very, very pleased with the ESA program in general, as well as the current administration. I appreciate what the director said. I applied for one of my students this past week who will be joining as a kindergarten student. It was fast, it was seamless, it was very efficient. The reimbursements are starting to roll in really quickly. We are now almost into mid-April on the reimbursements, and it has been wonderful and seamless. The one concern that I would like to address, and I apologize for even voicing anything like that, is that I would like to see the meetings be more inviting and accommodating to all members of the public. I know that the opinion that I hold speaks for many who love this program and appreciate the program, but they are, for lack of a better word, intimidated to come just because of some of the comments that are being left online in the public forum. For instance, I mean, there's many things being said I don't want to rehash, but it intimidates people from coming. And in my personal experience, and again, I'm not faulting the board for this at all, but I wonder if there's a solution going forward. I've only been to 2 previous meetings. At the first meeting that I attended, the person positioned behind us started dropping the F-bombs loudly and repeatedly in front of my kids, and she said she was practicing her French. Last month when I showed up with I believe I brought 9 of my children, they were very quiet, sitting over here, they were not being a disruption. And another individual walked in and said, I can't believe you brought all these brats again. And I said, excuse me, did you just call all the kids brats? And she said, yes, I did. And unfortunately, this gets back to other parents, and they are reluctant to come. And I'm not a shy person, but even I did not bring my kids today. And I believe that there are many people who feel like us positive about the program, but are afraid to come and speak and say that because of these issues. I think maybe there could be security at the door, or maybe there's some other solution, but thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Michaela Jones Dillova, followed by Stacy Brown, and then Jennifer Fritz.
Michaela, no?
So Stacy Brown, followed by Jennifer Fritz.
Good morning. I come before you today as a home educating parent, not only representing myself, but 57 other home educating families whose children are currently enrolled in ESA. These families have provided me feedback that they would like me to share, and because these families home educate their children, many could not be present today. There have been many changes to the program recently, and the ESA parents on whose behalf I'm speaking feel these changes have solidified the program for generations to come. Although some of these changes happened quickly and perhaps a different time would have been more ideal, there is absolutely understanding. I have had the privilege this month to speak with numerous ESA parents of students with disabilities, and I have found a common theme amongst many of them. They feel their children have been left behind. Most of these parents in no way are holding a grudge or disgruntled about the program or the administration, but would rather like to see solutions provided. And so I'm going to provide these solutions to you now. 1, a designated point person for parents of students with disabilities to contact to get consistent answers at the call center. Parents of students with disabilities are having a difficult time getting some basic questions answered with some of the needed adjustments to the program. This solution would provide the much needed consistency for parents of students with disabilities. 2, to have a liaison that parents of students with disabilities could have immediate access to, which would be the only one to handle their accounts. 3, at minimum, debit cards should be permitted for students with disabilities as they have costly therapies and immediate needs which improve overall academic achievement and quality of educational life. I've spoken with many families where these therapies can cost upwards of $1,000, and to have access to a debit card provides ease of payment for these therapies. 4, ultimately, the ESA program under the same umbrella should be separated as needs are different for universal students and students with disabilities. This would allow the staff to be an expert in their designated area, but would ultimately provide clarity in conversations. We know some of these offered solutions would take time to implement, but I would ask that consideration would be made. I appreciate your time and thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Jennifer Fritz, followed by Andrea McIntosh, and then Bryson McIntosh.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Since joining the program in September, I've been pleased to witness the new administration putting much effort into streamlining the program for complex vendors like myself and bringing it into compliance with all the present laws regarding ESA. The current handbook effectively captures these efforts and presents a simplified, scalable program. I hope to see the current handbook draft given your stamp of approval. Some parents are demanding that the old allowable list be reinstated, claiming it would help reduce help desk tickets. That database no longer makes sense or would be practical. I would like to propose an alternative to help reduce the help desk tickets would be to require some sort of online training module that parents are required to go through possibly before they start using the ESA funds. I was happy to hear at the last SBE meeting that the director plans to offer in-person trainings in-person and online live trainings in the future, and I think that will really go a long way in helping reduce help desk tickets, because a lot of expecting parents to read through the entire manual and absorb it all before using the program, I think isn't always realistic, but an online training module that would break things down for them could possibly help with that. And yep, overall, very pleased with the program, and reimbursements are coming through quickly now in this week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Andrea McIntosh, followed by Bryson McIntosh, and then Janelle Wood.
Thank you. This is not part of my discussion, but it might be helpful if everyone who attends the meetings is informed of the Arizona open meeting law. I don't know if we can have a little subject on that at some point, as to the fact that when you're talking on an item, it needs to be on the agenda. Just saying, unless it's under number 2. So the process is in the new ESA law, ARS 15-2403J, lack a timeline, lack due process, and do not explain how the eligibility category is determined. ESA parents have reported that their student's eligibility category is not communicated to the parent, so the parents have no way to know if their disabled student is categorized correctly. I have multiple questions for you. What disability eligibility categories exist for ESA students? Are these disability eligibility categories the same for all Arizona students? How are the disability eligibility categories communicated to ESA account holders? This does have to do with the handbook because the handbook does not communicate this information as it should. What is the multidisciplinary evaluation team process for ESA students? If ADE hires a contracted third-party vendor to do evaluations, what is the timeline for that process for an ESA student to get evaluated? Or if the county school superintendents have qualified examiners, what is the timeline? What happens if these contracted vendors lack the appropriate expertise for the particular student's disability? Do disabled ESA students have a right to due process? What are the procedural safeguards for ESA students? The processes for disabled students who use ESA need clarification. It needs to be lined out in the handbook. It needs to be according to the law. Since the handbook currently does not comply with SBE rules and does not align with federal IDEA, I ask that the members of the State Board of Education continue to reject it until they receive an acceptable draft handbook that aligns with AAC rules, ARS 15-2403.K, and state and federal laws.
Thank you.
Thank you. Also, no parent feedback was given for the handbook.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next, we have Bryson McIntosh, followed by Janelle Wood, and then Kristen Kuhlman.
Good to see you, Bryson.
First, let me start by saying thank you for allowing me to speak today. Some may think that my mom writes these speeches for me. This is purely false. I'm advocating and fighting for my rights as an ESA student. My name is Bryson McIntosh, and I'm a 14-year-old student on the Empowerment Scholarship. I fear retaliation for what I'm going to say, and I ask that Kristen Curso have nothing to do with my account. There are many flaws in this draft handbook presented to you today. I feel like Christina Curso is trying to further her political and religious agendas. In today's agenda, it states the board shall limit substantive changes to the handbook to once every 3 years. The board may approve changes to the handbook more frequently than every 3 years to conform and comply with changes to statute or this article at the board's discretion. Once adopted by the board, the handbook shall be posted on the department's website. If you simply go on Microsoft Word and compare the draft handbook and the current handbook, it shows that there are 5,121 changes, which is very substantial. On page 1, the quarter 3 date states that it is March 30th. That is not the last day of March, and on the next day, it says that it is April 1st. There is a missing date there. It should be March 31st. On page 8, it states, fees to manage ESA funds. What does that mean? It's not explained anywhere else in the handbook. Page 18. School desks and chairs are, it states, are reasonable and proportionate to qualified student size. What does that mean? What if a student grows? Manipulatives extend beyond mathematics and into all educational subjects. Why does it say only manipulatives for mathematics? Desk organizers, on page 18, desk organizer, small file drawer. What is small and how is it defined? Page 18, why are computer accessories listed here and then again on page 24? In page 21.
Go ahead, take a little more time. Yeah, you're fine.
Considering these factors, I ask that you reject this handbook.
Great. Thank you very much. Dr. Corr, Superintendent, board members of the board. Up next, we have Janelle Wood, followed by Kristen Kuma, and then Dr. Mark Jolstad.
Good morning, Board President Ford and board members and Superintendent Horn. My name is Janelle Wood. I'm founder and CEO of Black Mothers Forum. And I'm here today to share with you a survey of Black parents across the nation regarding their views on public education and school choice. Black parents want school choice because 43% of our Black parents look for learning environments that protect their children from bullying. Bullying is the top reason many of our parents turn to us to advocate on behalf of their children. In our focus to create safe and supportive learning environments, we support parents who choose to move their children to safer, more supportive learning environments, no matter where that may be. We also are proponents of our parents utilizing all resources that afford them the opportunity to do so. In the Empowerment Scholarship accounts, the ESAs, are one of those tools that we encourage our parents to use. We appreciate Director Kersel's desire to meet the needs of those parents who were blessed to utilize the ESAs for their babies prior to the universal ESAs. And I appreciate the comments for the young man and his mother regarding some of the concerns that they have about how those ESAs are being administered for them. And I pray that we come to a solution. I appreciate Director Coates for setting aside time to answer questions, to update the ESA handbook. While it appears it's not perfect, it's a work in progress, and to hire staff to help review and reimburse payments on a timely manner. We need to be a part of the solution versus complaining. So I'm here offering my services, which I do often in many of my school board meetings, to help get things caught up, help get the handbook read the way it needs to read, so that everybody gets what they need to get. I'm here to make sure the bills get paid and questions are answered, or whatever is needed to meet the needs of our babies here in Arizona. I'm not interested in what happened in the past or what happened in other states. But what I am interested in is making sure Arizona's students get what they stand in need of, and that's a good quality education. We got work to do, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Dr. Corr, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Kristen Kuma, followed by Dr. Mark Jornstadt, and then April Bova. Kristen, no? Dr. Jornstadt?
President Corr, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. I am Mark Jornstedt, representing the Arizona School Administrators. We bring to your attention today our concern over agenda item 5A, the ESA handbook, especially page 31. It equates two methods of qualifying as a child with a disability: a special education evaluation, individualized education program, IEP, from an Arizona public school district or charter school, or an independent education evaluation. There is one major difference between these two methods. In public school districts and charters, the evaluation is one step in the process, which also includes a multidisciplinary evaluation team, or MET, including the parent, the evaluator, teachers, therapists, and administrator, possibly an advocate, and others. The ADE has a 53-page handbook providing guidance on a proper MET. Determining eligibility for the Group B weight funds and other resources, omitting the MET and IEP process that school districts and charters are required to use, opens significant unintended consequences which the board should consider. Parents who use this method to get ESA funding and then possibly return to a district or charter school will be very unhappy when their students are not immediately provided with special education and related services and must start at the beginning of the process. School districts must follow federal law to provide these services and to utilize federally designated special education funding. Otherwise, audit findings will surely follow. Has the Auditor General's opinion been sought on this issue? Has the Attorney General's office been consulted on the establishment of a two-track method qualifying for special service in contravention of federal law? We stand with parents wanting to deliver the best possible education to their children in the most appropriate settings. Please clarify these potential problems before final approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Corr, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is April Boba, followed by Christo Visser, and then Lita Dellever.
Good morning, President Corr, Superintendent Horn, and members of the board. My name is April Boba. I'm the parent of a child attending public school in Scottsdale Unified School District. Today, I'm here to comment on Agenda Item A, the Empowerment Scholarship Account Handbook. I want to preface my comments by stating that my take on the handbook is that of non-SPED families, but general use families, because I agree with the comments that have been made for SPED families that they need a different set of accommodations under the handbook. I think that's glaringly clear. I appreciate the operational governance laid out in the handbook. I do not, however, see any governance that would hold ESA users accountable for educational outcomes in any other ways. As an Arizona taxpayer, it's pretty disturbing to read in the handbook that families are under no requirement to spend more than, and I quote, a portion of funds on reading, math, grammar, social studies, or science. We should expect ESA users, again, non-SPED families, to match the bar of our public schools in this area if we are serious about the quality of education in our state and improving it. It's also not clear to me why ESA families can claim reimbursements for private school uniforms, ACT, SAT tests, musical instruments, gymnastics classes, writing lessons, and so on. Public school families are out of pocket for these costs. Financial means testing should be required for these items, for any items of this nature, to ensure that those who truly cannot afford these services and who should be entitled to them are given the right access to them, particularly using public dollars. The argument for school choice hinges on the sentiment that taxpayers aren't getting their money's worth from public education. The Arizona ESA makes a mockery of that concept in my eyes. There is zero return on investment to Arizona taxpayers in paying for school uniforms and gym memberships. None of those items are related to school choice. Without accountability, the ESA is simply a misuse of taxpayer dollars. We need the State Department of Education to devise clear governance and academic outcomes for ESAs, comparable to those imposed on our public schools. I would add this should also extend to open meeting law compliance for the ESA Parent Advisory Committee with published minutes and meeting agendas on the State Ed website. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Dr. Corr, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Christo Visser, followed by Lita Dellever, and then Lisa Calderon.
Morning, Dr. Corr, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. This is Christo Visser. I'm speaking on behalf of the ESA program, staunch advocate and in favor of the program. My wife, Kathy Visser, has provided commentary via email. I will not have enough time to share some corrections, changes within the program. We'll go through those. But again, we appreciate the board's consideration and ongoing efforts to develop and maintain the handbook for accountability for us to participate in the program. Page 8, under the description regarding tuition or fees at an eligible post-secondary institution to purchase required textbook, the words in-state need to be removed and reference post-secondary institution as in-state is not part of the statute referenced in post-secondary institutions in line with that. As well, furthermore, page 12, on a bullet point there, account holders must submit to the tutor's credentials when submitting an expense through ESA portal. We need to clarify that this requirement is only for debit or reimbursement payment. This is not in line with the correct procedure listed on page 15. Or page 15, under extracurricular activities, physical educational and educational camps, this section should be moved to page 17 and 18, supplementary, no documentation required as it is not reported as tutoring and does not have the same documentation requirement. I have more details under that. On page 17 and 18, please add headphones and earbuds to the list. There is quite a bit of advocacy in forums and parents that meet, and this has been a question that comes up every single day and ask for support of these devices. Again, headphones, earbuds. I have about 15 more. I'm running out of time. I certainly have printed copies. I'm happy to leave with the board. We did submit via email. Again, thank you for your support and full consideration to the ESA.
Thank you. Just to clarify, what you're leaving with us has already been submitted via email.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Lita Delveger, followed by Lisa Calderon, and then Lynn Fox Emery.
Good morning, President Core, Superintendent Horn, and members of the board. My name is Lita Delveger. I was born and raised in Cottonwood, Arizona, went to NAU, and I've lived in the East Valley now for over 20 years. I'm currently a single parent, and I have 2 kids in Gilbert Public Schools. One's a senior about to graduate in a month. My children are very different kids. My son, who's about to graduate, attends a school that is all honors and AP, and has always excelled academically. My daughter, on the other hand, has an IEP, and she works very hard and does okay, but she needs supports in place. The ESA voucher program is hurtful to people like me and kids like mine, and the majority of Arizona's kids. Why? Because most people using the universal program already have had their kids in private schools. The proposed changes of the ESA handbook do nothing to ensure transparency in taxpayer dollars or help make sure funds go to families in need. We will spend, meaning the state of Arizona, taxpayers like me, will spend $500 million this year on universal ESA vouchers with virtually no oversight or accountability compared to what our public schools provide. As a single parent, I don't have the extra funds to send my kids to private school. Even if I were to pull an ESA voucher, that doesn't cover the full cost of private school. There's no way I can afford to make up the difference, and I don't have family and friends to be able to do that either. I also am not able, given my situation, to homeschool my children. Not only that, but taking a voucher hurts our public schools, which serve Arizona's most vulnerable kids, perpetuating inequities in our schooling. My kids and all Arizona kids in our public schools have never been in a fully funded school. When I attended when I was a kid, it was very different. It's really unfortunate that our current high schoolers, junior high kids, and even elementary kids have never been in a fully funded public school in our state. With over 90% of Arizona kids attending public schools, it is clear that they are the overwhelming choice for parents. The Arizona Department of Education has been entangled with finding ways to prop up the universal ESA program while totally ignoring our public schools. I urge you to refocus your work, find ways to support Arizona's public school children, educators, and their schools. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Lisa Calderon, followed by Lynn Fox Emery, and then Rachel Clausen.
Hello, good morning, Superintendent, President, Core, and board members. My name is Lisa Calderon. I am a proud public school parent. I have 4 daughters, and 3 of which currently attend Chandler Public Schools. I have been very involved in their education. I love public schools because they give an environment for all students to learn and thrive, guided by professional educators. I am here to discuss my concerns with the Universal ESA Voucher Program, as well as the proposed ESA handbook. As an involved parent, I have been to countless school board meetings and have watched the transparent process that school districts go through when dealing with budgets, expense, vendors, and teachers and staff salaries. The Universal ESA Voucher Program provides no such transparency, and the handbook does nothing to address the glaring issue in light of the $5 million price tag this program is costing Arizona taxpayers. As a mom, I do not hesitate to protect my children from danger. I expect many mothers and parents in this room do likewise. And yet the ESA handbook does nothing to address child safety from predators or abusers. At this time, we are still funding at least one vendor with a tutor facing charges of sexual assault with a minor. I am appalled that taxpayer dollars are going to vendors who do not have to deal with basic fingerprinting or background checks. Public schools serve all students, no matter their income level, race, sexual orientation, or identity. Please require equal accountability from the ESA voucher system as you do for the public schools. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Lynn Fox Embry, followed by Rachel Clausen, and then Elijah Watson.
Good morning. So here I am again. I don't know how many times I've come up here and spoke on this subject, but so the handbook, I do see from draft 2 to draft 3, lots of changes were made. However, I still think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. Some of the comments that were given by the members of this board were addressed, but then others were not addressed. So I'm asking that we reject this handbook, maybe find a way, I don't know how to do this, to have the staff, the board, some parents from both sectors, SPUD kids and universal kids, get together and work on it so we don't approve a handbook that still has tons of issues in it. One of the concerns I believe Dr. Clay made at the last meeting or the meeting before was on the insurance. It's still not defined in the handbook. What does insurance mean? What does security bonds mean? I, as a taxpayer, look at the word insurance and think, can I go pay for homeowners insurance for my house? Because it's with the surety bond, which means I need to have some type of insurance to protect people from suing me. Is that what it means? I don't know. I just want someone to try to clarify that for me. What does fees mean? Is fees a way for, if debit cards are taken away, that companies can come up and say, hey, I'll help you be a concierge service like they used to have, but I'm going to charge you 5% extra. What does fees mean? It's not in the handbook. And I know that we brought this up the last 2 meetings. I do see some things have been corrected, but I still think there's a lot of other changes that need to be made. The group of us put together a list, I think it's like 5 pages long, that still has line by line items. I just urge each of you to take time to read through the public comments before you vote. I know last year we accepted a handbook that we're currently on, and there's still issues in that handbook. So I think before we move on to the next handbook, we really need to address the legal issue. A lot of people here in this room have talked about following statute. And I think there is holes still in the thing about clear definition of statute. So I beg you to please take time, reject this handbook and look at it before you move on.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Rachel Clausen, followed by Elijah Watson, and then Kevin Jemerway.
Rachel, are you with us? Yeah, Elijah, we go right on to Elijah.
Kevin Jemerway would be next. So we would have Jay Griffin, followed by Cassio Savarino, and then Delia Aguirre.
Hello, my name
name is Jay Griffin. I'd like to ask the board to grant an additional 2 minutes for me to speak. As at a March meeting, I was here, but I was not able to speak at that time, so.
Please.
Thank you very much. Listen, my name is Jay Griffin. Thank you, board president, members of the board, and superintendent, for hearing me today. I'm here today to educate the board regarding deficiencies, department's deficiency in administering the ESA program according to its constitutional oath, Arizona law, and administrative rules, and request that the board respond with swift and corrective action. The department has failed to provide the State Board of Education, the board, a draft copy of the proposed ESA parent handbook by the March 1st deadline this year. The department's first and second drafts that they provided to the board in an untimely manner were developed by agents that we, the people, did not grant authority to delegate grant authority to the department to delegate its official responsibilities attached to. The department should not develop the handbook in conjunction with the ESA parents as required in administrative rules. The department handbook drafts that were provided to the board did not identify changes compared to prior versions of the handbook as required in law. As required by board rules. The department neglected to establish or maintain a database including all of the expenses the department has made administrative decisions on as required by rule. The department has neglected to make the database available to parents in an accessible online format as required by rule. The department has not established a process for reviewing expenses before making an administrative decision as required by Arizona law. The department has not provided a copy of the department's administrative and substantive process for reviewing expenses to the board as required by rule. The department has neglected to include the process for reviewing expenses in the draft versions of the ESA parent handbook. The department has transacted payments for expenses that are allowed, transacted repayments for expenses that are allowed under the Arizona revised statutes, Title 152502. The department has neglected to treat expenditures under review consistently with similar expenses that the department has previously made determinations on. The department has neglected to propagate granted MCC code exceptions to all parents, including accounts without an issued or active debit card within 5 business days as required by Arizona rule.
Jay, I'm going to ask you to wrap up here.
Oh, okay. So the department is wasting the people's money by spending department resources on quarters expense reviews when it is more than 30 days past that quarter's deadline. The department has suspended debit cards without notice or without providing the parent an opportunity to correct deficiencies according to law, according to the rule. And the department has developed and implemented enrollment forms and processes that deny the applicant or account holder from qualifying as a student as defined in the definitions in 1501.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Core, Superintendent, board members of the board, up next is Cassio Severino, who was our last in-person speaker. And then we will be switching to virtual with Belia Aguirre and Rebecca.
Good morning, President Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. My name is Cass Severino. I'm a retired public school teacher with 34 years in the Deer Valley District. With 2 children and 6 grandchildren, all attended public school. I'm here to address the passage of the handbook, ESA handbook for the school year 23-24. The board's doing an incredible disservice to the public education system, which educates 90% of our students, by siphoning off large chunks of poorly regulated monies, give handouts to charter schools and institutions, some of which are profit-based, questionable regulations in regards to vendors, tutors that are allowed to cherry pick students, help their image, and at the same time discriminate against other students based upon race, religion, sexual identity, or disability. This abuse of public funds is not what Arizona's founding fathers imagined when they incorporated the right to a public education in our state's constitution. This ESA program is spending over $500 million a year with insufficient oversight as compared to public schools at a time when we are 47th in funding and have an impending public school crisis in the near future based upon ill-advised tax cuts. This board would be well advised to table the approval of the ESA handbook until it can investigate and solve many of the glaring issues of equity, financial accountability, and safety of students. This board should require background checks, fingerprinting of all vendors involved in schools as it does with public schools. All of the academic standards and certifications should mirror those required by public schools. Non-public schools should not be given a pass for political gain and imagery at the expense of what was clearly stated in the Arizona State Constitution. As seen here today, there appears to be many issues and problems that are unaddressed. Please fix these before your final approval of the handbook.
Thank you. Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. We begin our virtual speakers. First is Velia Choir, followed by Rebecca Cross, and then Allison Hilliker.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Velia Aguirre. I have homeschooled my son since he was 6 years old. It was not until. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Hello? Okay. I have homeschooled my son since he was 6 years old. It was not until he was in third grade that we received the ADHD diagnosis and enrolled him in the ESA program. He is now in the fourth grade. Last summer, we noticed several negative issues, which we concluded were symptoms of ADHD. Despite all of the ADHD interventions and treatment options, these issues did not resolve. It was not until he started to complain about eye pain and headaches during lessons, leisure reading, and athletic activities, coupled with the lack of progress and performance, that we took him to an optometrist. He was diagnosed with 5 visual impairments. His optometrist has described his conditions, and I quote, as his vision is extremely unstable. It's a chronic problem, limiting his academic and athletic success, and that he is suffering. I know visual impairment is a disability under IDEA, and that he would be eligible for special education services in a public school. ESA has rejected his visual impairment because it was not diagnosed by a physician, psychologist, or psychiatrist per the new statute. SBE needs to fix the rules for ESA so that the students using ESA are eligible for the same categories of disabilities as students in public schools. And if SBE cannot fix their rules, then SBE needs to ask the legislature to fix the law. The rule update needs to reflect IDEA disability eligibilities because low incidence disabilities are diagnosed by audiologists, optometrists, and orthopedists, and they are being rejected because the ESA law doesn't include the necessary professionals for the IDEA eligibility categories. This means that children in ESA with outside evaluation diagnoses of hearing impairments and orthopedic impairments are being denied services. Please fix the law so my son and other children can receive the funding they need for their educational needs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Rebecca Cross, followed by Allison Hilliker, and then Bianca, and we just have a last initial beat.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak today. I'm speaking from the hallway at Glendale Community College again this month. I would like to address a couple of things, focus mostly on the most recent email that the administration sent out. They like to give us these dates and tell us what date they are on with everything, but these dates are not accurate. For example, they said for reimbursements, they are currently working on reimbursements from April 3rd forward. I have multiple reimbursements from January 29th that are just sitting there. They opened them back in March and have ignored them since. As I mention every month, our replacement musical instrument continues to be denied. They want more and more paperwork. They want formal scope and sequence. And I'm still waiting on the money for that reimbursement. They have started to just ignore most of my tickets, it seems. One thing that they are not tracking are help desk tickets. I have help desk tickets sitting from January 5th, January 21st, February 1st, April 3rd, April 16th. On March 21st, I put in a request for a guitar to go with classes that we were taking on OutSchool. It was denied, saying that we need a class and a formal curriculum per statute. I reopened it. I said, could you please show me where in statute it says that? Because I've read the link statute and it's not there. They immediately closed it again. I reopened it. I said, please do not close my tickets without answering. I would like to know where the statute is. They closed it again. I reopened it again. Then they just ignored it from March 31st until last week, at which point they decided that it is okay to take it with a class. So I thought, okay, we're back to following what is legally allowed. So I waited for the Friday email to make sure that everybody would know that classes are sufficient, but it has not been said to anyone. So I do not know if this is actually going to be honored, if it's going to be communicated to everybody, and I'm very concerned about that. The other date is April 17th. Applications opened. They only open for universal students. My child is an incoming kindergartner, and legally, he cannot apply under universal status. They are trying to force us to do that, so my only choices are to not put him on ESA or to apply fraudulently, and this needs to be fixed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, up next is Allison Hilliker, followed by Bianca B, and then Tanya Rayner.
Executive Director Ross, Allison Hilliker, and Bianca B, not joining the meeting.
Thanks, Jessica. So up next is Tanya Rayner, followed by Susan Collins, and then Benita Golson.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. The ESA program under this administration discriminates against the very students the scholarship was designed to serve, including students with disabilities with 45 days of public school attendance, students residing on Native American reservations, and students whose parents serve in the armed forces. The ESA program launched its 2023-2024 application last week. However, the ESA department has failed to offer an application for these qualified students, specifically those students listed under ARS 15-2401, Item 2. This application recommends that parents apply for ESAs for their K-12 students under Universal, but fails to provide an alternative. It has been said that the universal-only application is a politically motivated strategy to boost enrollment under the 2022 expansion. It has been said that there is strength in numbers, but this special interest tactic removes the rights and privileges that state and federal laws afford to the other qualified students under ARS 15-2401. I urge the State Board of Education to review the current application for the ESA program and to align this application with the law. I also urge the State Board of Education to reject this handbook draft, which continues to provide misinformation, errors, and inconsistencies, and fails the students this program serves. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Susan Collins, followed by Benita Golson, and then Harmony Irely.
Good morning, President Core, Superintendent Horn, and members of the board. My name is Susan Collins. I am a resident of Kingman, Arizona, a teacher no longer working in the classroom, a parent, and a concerned citizen. I want to address the disparity between oversight of the use of public funds used in public schools and the use of those same funds when used through the ESA program. Public schools are required to undergo rigorous audits of their financial records to ensure that money allocated to them is being used in the manner it was intended. This includes, but is not limited to, ensuring that personnel are qualified through educational documentation and licensing through the State Department of Education, that any person who comes in contact with a student has been independently vetted and background checked to ensure child safety, and suspension of personnel when child safety is questioned. Public schools also face extensive documentation of the previously mentioned actions and fines and penalties for not adhering to these policies. These and other policies were put in place to ensure quality of instruction and child safety. When students are enrolled in a public school, parents need and deserve the assurance that these procedures are being followed. When public money is used to fund education, taxpayers and voters need and deserve the assurance that the funds are being used to properly educate and keep students safe. When I look at the ESA handbook, I do not see the same level of accountability, documentation, vetting, or consequences for not following the procedures. Since the catchphrase that has been used is "the money follows the student," the accountability should follow the student also. As a taxpayer and a voter, the fact that the ESA handbook lacks this type of accountability is very, very concerning to me. Who is auditing the records, ensuring that providers hold the necessary credentials? What consequences are in place other than losing the ESA? And how is student safety addressed? Are approved vendors required to have all of their personnel, background, and IVP fingerprint checked? I urge you to please address these issues. Thank you for your time and for listening.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Benita Golson, followed by Harmony Irely, and then Julie Batt.
Hello.
Good morning.
Okay, can anybody hear me?
We can hear you just fine. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I have a question. I don't see my name on the list, but I see my daughter is on the list and she's not here at home. So I'm Carmen Terrell. Am I on the list to speak?
You don't appear to be, but you're on the clock. So if you have some thoughts to share, please go ahead and do so.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, Superintendent and members of the board. I'm Carmen Terrell, and I'm just here to say that, you know, this is a whole mess. And between political stunts, legislation and everything, I see why public school is going down. It's not enough funds. It's not enough funds to do nothing. I mean, it's enough stuff can't even be discussed in school as it is. But then you just constantly sit here and do stuff like ESA funding and the other stuff that's associated with it. It doesn't make any sense. And if it keeps going like this, it's like, who's going to get taught what? And what's going to happen to children if they don't get taught at all? I just think that this ESA stuff got to stop, because at the end of the day, I mean, the children that's supposed to serve, they're not being served, like some have said on this call. And I just think this whole situation has to start over. And this time, make it better for public school, as well as their content of what they can teach, instead of just being so selective in terms of fear of what's being taught. So thank y'all for your time. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Jessica, can I clarify, is Benita Golson with us?
On Zoom, that's who shows is Benita Golson, so
Oh, okay.
I'm sure he spoke.
Okay, would you mind emailing her, just saying if she still wanted to speak maybe toward the end of the PowerPoint? Superintendent Horn, Dr. Ford, members of the board. Up next is Harmony Irely, followed by Julie Gatt, and then Elizabeth Woods.
Good morning.
Good morning. We can hear you just fine. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Esteemed members of the board and Superintendent Horn, equity means the consistent, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals. Equitable access to government programs is a vital principle in our democracy. Unfortunately, the groundbreaking ESA program of Arizona is being administered inequitably. Some of the account holders have been given debit cards to access their children's funds, but others have been denied. I had 2 children on the program with debit cards and 2 who joined later without. After many emails and phone calls, I happened to talk to Mrs. Accurso herself and was given debit cards for my daughters just last month. While this solves my personal problem, I cannot stop speaking out for the thousands of parents whose children's education is suffering because they are not one of the lucky ones who got to talk to the program director herself. Without a debit card, parents are limited in using their funds. If they don't have the money for reimbursements, they are not able to buy curriculum in a timely manner, and then only with limited choices. They are forced to go through the marketplace system where orders can take 4 to 6 weeks to be approved and are often canceled because of the delay. Many vendors are not a part of ClassWallet and refuse to join because of the untenable time frame that they have to wait for payment. Not having a debit card limits certain families to narrow selection of professionals to help their children, while families who have debit cards can pick from any professional who meets their child's needs. Most community colleges and universities will not become vendors on ClassWallet. So families trying to access their funds for dual enrollment or college education must have the money to put out up front. As you can see, not having a debit card puts some families, especially low-income families, at a huge disadvantage. Administering this program without immediately providing debit cards for everyone is inequitable, arguably illegal, and wrong.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Julie Batt, followed by Elizabeth Lewis, and then Janice Negley.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine, Julie. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Julie Batt, and I am an ESA parent of 2 children, one of which has special needs and is graduating this year with a 4.0 and will attend college this fall. So we are so grateful for how this program has empowered him to reach his potential. After hearing the ESA director talk in various public meetings over the last couple months, I've come to realize that to the untrained ear, most of this sounds perfectly reasonable. However, this isn't how it's playing out in reality. And unless you have detailed working knowledge of the program, you don't realize the repercussions some of the department's confusing policies or actions have until you're actually trying to comply with the expense reporting. So as you discuss the handbook today, I encourage you to lean heavily on Member Clark's feedback. She's the only one that understands the program intimately from a user's perspective and across the broad spectrum of allowable ESA expenses. Specifically, I wanted to talk about in the special handbook meeting last month, the director said in the second draft that language for the associated goods hadn't changed. However, in practice, her employees are using more cumbersome parameters, and she actually made a substantive change in this third draft without notice or red line. The rule gives broad examples of documentation, such as showing educational need in an evaluation or a MET report. It doesn't require the items be listed specifically or generally. Previously, I could get fidget tools for ADHD or a reading pen for dyslexia by just showing the proof of disability, and I would briefly explain how these items would help their education. This is also why the rule was updated to say parents did not have to go back to the school to get an updated MET, and a therapist letter was not the only option. The law currently empowers parents to choose appropriate therapies for their children, and we're not limited by just the ones that appear on an IEP. Likewise, the rule empowers parents to determine which associated goods will help their children's disabilities, and the handbook language needs to follow this, as well as the department's administration of this rule. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Elizabeth Lewis, followed by Janice Knightley, and then Callie Zook.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine. Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning, members of the board. I'm Beth Lewis, Director of Save Our Schools Arizona, educator and parent. I'm coming to you this morning dismayed by the potential passage of this ESA handbook, which quite frankly harms Arizona children and waters down the very idea of what education means in this state. The State Board of Education's mission is to develop successful citizens through robust public education. Reducing certification requirements for ESA instructors directly contradicts this idea of robust education. This proposed handbook strips away credentialing requirements, now requiring a mere high school diploma instead of subject matter degrees or certification. Diluting any need for certification removes all guarantees for parents that their child's teachers have the pedagogical knowledge or skill to teach core subjects. Arizona taxpayers desperately want to know where our taxpayer dollars are going, and you all at the state board and the ADE are the only entities with any amount of oversight over this $500 million per year ESA program. This handbook could have focused on increasing transparency to prevent fraud and abuse. Instead, it does the opposite and strips away allowable use guidelines. What's worse, this handbook leaves children vulnerable. Why are we not, at the very least, talking about fingerprinting and background checks for tutors and vendors? This handbook offers zero safety mechanisms to prevent bad actors from signing up as vendors and harming our children. In fact, Dylan DePalma's martial arts studio is still listed as an ESA vendor in Class Wallet, despite the fact that an instructor has been arrested for sexual molestation of a minor at this martial arts studio. My question is, what is the state board going to do about this? The ADE and the board could have used this handbook as an opportunity to put processes in place to stop these bad actors. I am sickened at the thought that Arizona's esteemed State Board of Education would be passing this handbook as state policy. The handbook and the ADE have been co-opted by special interests like DeVos's American Federation for Children, and this handbook prioritizes political agendas over child safety. I'm truly devastated that this board would consider enshrining this attack into public policy while utterly failing to increase transparency or accountability of a $500 million per year program that stands even more rife for bad actors, fraud, and abuse now because of the inaction of this board for this handbook.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Janice Knightley, followed by Kelly Zook, and then Joy Kay.
Janice Knightley and Kelly Zook are not in the meeting.
Thanks, Jessica. So we have Joy Kay, followed by Jean Castine, and then Allison Wills.
Hello?
Good morning, Joy. We can hear you just fine. Please go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm actually sitting in a parking lot at my daughter's therapy.
No worries.
Hello. Hello, members of the board, Ms. Accurso. I want to thank you for your time today. So I was just wondering, and I know you can't respond, but I'm guessing other parents have the same question. What authority does the SBE actually have over the ESA department? Parents have been asking for months to have the allowable expenses database returned to the website. It's an SBE rule, yet to date, nothing has been done about it. I'm just wondering, why is that? The ESA department is breaking your rules, yet are not held accountable. I'm not trying to sound harsh or offensive, but what's the point in a rule if it can be broken without consequence? And Ms. Accurso, wouldn't having a database put everyone on the same page? Parents would actually know what's allowed and what's not. Staff would know exactly what's been approved and what's disallowed. No more guessing, no more staff voting on curriculum. Yeah, we've been told that happens. No more getting different answers depending on who you talk to or what day it is. Why wouldn't you want to streamline your processes, make it more efficient and equitable, and free up staff resources for more important tasks? You've got to know by now the confusion your bullet point list causes parents. If you don't, then you're not reading our emails and you're not listening to our concerns in meetings. In fact, out of 392 pages of comments for today's meeting, there are 88 mentions of the database. That's approximately 1 out of every 5 pages. Please do the right thing, the lawful thing, and return the database to the website. And SBE, we ask again that you enforce this rule. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, up next is Jean Castine, followed by Allison Wilkes, and then Kathy Bowles.
Executive Director Ross, Jean Castine is not joining the meeting.
Thanks, Jessica. Up next is Allison Wilkes, then Kathy Bowles, and then Kirsten Galindo. Allison, can you hear us?
Let's try this. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
We can hear you just perfectly.
Okay.
And apologize.
Perfect.
Go ahead, we can hear you.
No, I think it was my fault. I think there was one more button I needed to click. All right, thank you. Good morning. Thank you for being patient with me this morning. I'm recovering from COVID. Good morning, board. Thank you for your diligent eyes and ears on the ADE proposed draft handbook. Many account holders have sent very detailed information on the issues with this proposed handbook. So I don't feel the need to list them out or get into specifics now. You guys have all that information. Please reject the current handbook submission. ADE continues to drastically change each draft, which creates a list of needed fixes. Why are we going in circles with this administration? It is imperative that the handbook follows state statute, federal statute, and SBE rules so that account holders can use the program correctly. Please remember the special education students who this program was originally intended for. The changes are ableist and they impact them disproportionately. ADE lack of planning should not create an emergency for the board or account holders. Please take as long as necessary for ADE to comply with recommendations of the board and account holders before approving the handbook. Account holders do not want the board to feel rushed to accept this handbook because ADE has failed to follow deadlines. Do not accept this document that is riddled with interpretation of special interest groups and contradictory information. The loud voices of the advocate parents who've shown up for years appreciate your time and have always presented you with well-researched information. These ESA parents are teachers, therapists, scientists, and nurses who hold higher degrees. They're amazing parents and they can be grateful and advocate at the same time. Please reject the current draft handbook. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, up next is Kathy Bowles, followed by Kirsten Galindo, and then Amanda Adams.
Hello, can you hear me and see me?
We can both hear you and see you just fine. Please go ahead.
Great. President Core, Superintendent Horn, and board members. The Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo's David, inappropriately explicit. Women sunbathing with no children and not pregnant, labeled as degenerate in Germany in the late 1930s, along with modernist art, which was tied to disabilities. Disabled people were considered degenerate. Stalin's USSR and Mao's China went in for a level of censorship that was mind-boggling. But it was all for the people, so how could anyone be against that or against protecting the innocent? Sometimes these things start out of genuine caring, but they are likely to be taken over by some bureaucratic version of the Inquisition, as a famous author has said. Inappropriately explicit materials, as stated in recent email and the handbook, could easily sweep up a wide swath of literature and health-related content. It could extend to science, numerical literacy, the mathematics of encryption, and the history of racism, sexism, and ableism. Fortunately, Arizona's ESA law does not permit any government agency to exercise control or supervision over any homeschool. Parents have rights. So inappropriately explicit must be removed because it does not align with the law. Perhaps it was deemed inappropriately explicit to have information about the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act and the rights of disabled students in the current ESA handbook. Is that why it has been repeatedly edited out, even with the help of clerics from the special interest group American Federation of Children? Perhaps it would be inappropriately explicit to teach disabled students about their IDEA and ADA rights. Parents and not bureaucrats from the Department of Education or their special interest clerics have the responsibility to determine what is appropriate for their child to learn, especially in a homeschooling situation. Reject this handbook, reject all the new policies because they are causing the ESA program to fail. They are disproportionately affecting disabled students.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Kirsten Galindo, followed by Amanda Adams, Sarah Blank, and then Jackson W.
Good morning, everybody. I would like to add my thoughts to just to say that I agree with what Kathy Bolt said, that inappropriate and explicit needs to be removed from the handbook. I think that this is something that parents have the responsibility to protect their children in this way and to determine what is appropriate to guide their education. This is one of the wonderful things about homeschooling in Arizona, is that the state considers it the parents' responsibility. I also would like to talk about my concern about the inequitable distribution of debit cards across the program. I believe that although it has been expressed previously that debit cards are specifically important for special education students, I think this is inaccurate. I think that it is important for special education students, but it is important for all students on the program to have access to debit cards. They are what make it possible for parents to access funds in a timely way, to be able to access resources at the best prices, and to be able to have the widest selection of quality resources to choose from. So I just want to add that that is very important. I also feel that the allowable expenses items list needs to be returned to the website. I think that the handbook right now uses a lot of vague language. The allowable items list is just a bullet list that is not being interpreted by everyone the same way. For instance, it says on the allowable items list that field trips are to be approved with no documentation necessary. However, this hasn't been true. When field trips have been submitted that the department feels are questionable, are they educational, they're asking for documentation to be submitted. So it's just not, it's clear that their interpretations and parents' interpretations are different, and we need something that's not so vague, something that everybody can understand clearly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Up next is Amanda Adams, followed by Sarah Blank, Jackson W, and then Kristen.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine. Please go ahead.
All right. I just want to thank the board this morning and Superintendent Horn and Director Curso for having a little bit more of a transparent process for the handbook in the last month. But the handbook still has some glaring issues. But it is definitely better than the first presented copy. My biggest concerns with the new handbook draft are as follows. I echo the concerns for the searchable database of approved items not being returned. This is one that is in SB rules and absolutely should be returned both to the handbook and to practice on the website. It will increase transparency and also make it easier for parents to purchase items with confidence. Right now, I am unconfident in purchasing anything, honestly, outside of my tutors. The second item I have that I am concerned with are the requirements for curriculum when buying supplemental items that need to be justified. The first issue with this requirement is that when you're enrolled in a class, they are now requiring a curriculum often and not just the enrollment in the class and then the class supply list. That needs to be done away with. Teachers are not going to give us their curriculum. That's an undue burden on families. I also disagree with the formal being put into curriculum. This is not in statute. Statute just defines curriculum as a course of study, and SBE further define that as activity and study guides, class or course study, class learning objectives, learning guides, lesson plans, teacher guides, and manuals. And I would exhort you that the word formal should be dropped and that we should go back to the way that curriculum was defined previously. I also am concerned about the inappropriate explicit material listed under disallowed expenses. 5 or 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have blinked an eye at this, but with the culture war that's being waged right now, I am very concerned about this and how it's going to affect parents. I also am concerned about the vague language. This is also something that has been consistently a problem. We seem to see favoritism occur because the language is not specific and clear. And so we need more specific, clear language, including that searchable database, so that everything can be more transparent and more equitable across the board. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Core, Superintendent, board members of the board, we have Sarah Blank, followed by Jackson W, and then Kristen.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, and members of the board. As Dr. Clay so eloquently noted last month, silos are being created within the ESA program. This is creating undue hardship for both account holders and frontline staff. Many families with special needs students turn to ESA because their child needs a customized education and they don't fit within the larger system. That's one reason it's important that this program work for our students. 2 ways that we can avoid constructing silos are through communication and aligning with the law and the rules. This communication must be timely, accurate, and transparent. As such, the most important communication we have for the ESA program is the handbook. It is paramount that our handbook be clear, consistent, and accurate. It should serve as a guide to all account holders in using the program. The draft handbook that you have before you is none of these things. The second component in avoiding silos within the ESA program is aligning with the law. This is done through action and not words. A prominent example is the denial of IDEA federal rights. The current administration has reinterpreted federal law to say IDEA is not applicable to ESA students. I urge you to provide your professional advice and opinion. Please advise the ESA office to align with the law. The second example of not aligning with the law is placing all account holders under the universal category. This does not in any way align with state statute. Each ESA category was created with purpose. Universal is one of those categories. It does not encompass any other category. Please advise the ESA office to align with the law and open up all categories for applicants. Please reject the draft handbook and please advise the ESA office to align with the law. Thank you as always for your time and your service. You are appreciated.
Thank you, Sarah.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, we have Jackson W, followed by Kristen.
Good morning, board. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine, Jackson. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a high school student who has received the Empowerment Scholarship account since 5th grade. I am so thankful my parents chose this for me because I need special education and the public school was not helping. I was falling below grade level in a few subjects and the lack of support was causing me to struggle emotionally because of the school would not accept my autism diagnosis for my AAP. With ESA, my parents were able to try out 2 special education schools and a private Christian school. None of those boxes were designed for me either. They all lacked qualified staff and accountability. They were all less therapeutic than my school experience at public school. With online school through ASU, private tutors, and educational therapies, I am thriving and reaching my potential and discovering abilities beyond what some thought I could do. I am succeeding in math and have become an excellent research writer. ESA has allowed me to work at my pace, and I am closing on crossing the finish line with dual courses under my belt. My parents work hard to advocate for this program and for special education students in Arizona, and I want to help too. It scares me that the current administration wants to forget which students the program was intended for in the beginning. I am entitled to my federal protection under IDEA, U.S. Department of Education decrees. The adults have a lot to say. I think you need to hear from students more. Please reject the current draft handbook. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Jackson. We're very proud of you.
Dr. Kaur, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, our final speaker virtually is Kristen Luma.
Are you able to hear me?
We can hear you just fine. Please go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Our family is so grateful for the ESA program. It has allowed our child to be educated in an equitable way, which has allowed him to thrive. It has allowed him to be educated in a way that the public school system failed our son. As a longstanding parent of ESA program, I urge you to reject this draft of the handbook. There are some major concerns as a parent of a student on ESA with unclear and inconsistent rules written in the handbook. Many of these have been addressed in comments, both written and spoken today. So I will not be spending time clarifying those. In regards to the new searchable allowable list, the language is vague in many places, leaving room for questions and subjective interpretation. Things talk about small, such as for a small bookshelf being approved. But what is small? How is that defined? Would it not be based on the need to store the materials used by the student and not necessarily by size for a student? If we are going to allow bookshelves, it should be allowed the same regulations as other items, where it is not a professional or a commercial product or a commercial level product. Similarly, how do you determine what is proportional for a student when talking about a desk or a chair? What if the student is using multiple work areas and needs space to work as well as a computer space? A full-size desk may be what is needed for the student, even if they're in 4th grade. This goes for things also on the deniable list as well. They are vague and unclear. In addition, it is extremely difficult to contact staff members when things are rejected or denied inappropriately. Hold times are long for calls, and the new callback feature is not offered on many of the calls. Emails are never answered or inconsistently answered, and staff are not consistent in these approvals and denials. Returning to a previous searchable allowable list gives consistency for both staff and for the parents of a student. Another major concern is the changes that have occurred that are no longer aligned with the current handbook. Emails are not a formal way to adjust changes. Purchases that follow our current handbook should be allowed as followed by the current handbook, and it should be optional to use the changes. Please allow these changes to happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Kaur, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, that concludes this call to the public.
Fantastic. Then with as long as my colleagues on the board are okay with this, I'll move right into the general session, item 5, and then we'll take a break after that. Given that we have discussed and heard from feedback on the ESA for many months, if not years at this point, I'll provide an opportunity for each member of the board to share their thoughts. And if they wish, explain their vote. There's no need to do that, but I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to do that. So with that, let's move on to item 5A, presentation, discussion, and possible action on the Empowerment Scholarship Account ESA handbook for the school year 23-24. Executive Director Ross.
Dr. Kaur, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, with us today is Executive Director of ESA for ADE, Christina Curso. She'll be presenting to you.
Good morning.
Morning.
You can be okay.
Hear you just fine. Thank you.
I know we had problems last time, so I'm gonna put it right up to the 19. Dr. Kaur, Superintendent Horn, and members of the board. Good morning. I'm Christina Curso, Executive Director for ESA. Before you this morning is our 23-24 final draft of the handbook. And I wanted to go through some specific slides of some changes since the last time we spoke at our last meeting. The first one is the scholarship from a school tuition organization at the same time as receiving an ESA. On the screen, you'll see the reference to the law. Many accounts do end up double dipping, even though that is inadvertent sometimes. We have questions from staff, STOs, private schools. Everyone gets very confused when people are trying to switch from quarter to quarter. I've been requested to reveal the list of names of those in the program so they can cross-reference it. Of course, I will never do that because that's not appropriate. But private schools, STOs, and even our staff are trying to keep it straight. And there's parents that choose an ESA one quarter, an STO the next quarter, then they switch back to ESA and then back to an STO. It's very confusing. We get dozens of checks back from private schools and service providers every week. Even one check last week for $41,000 just continually come in because they're trying to keep it straight if a student is on an STO or an ESA. I spoke with the attorneys and asked them to review this statute. And they did confirm it's reasonable to interpret the law to mean that you cannot both use an ESA and STO in the same year. So we're making that adjustment that you would choose an STO or an ESA for the year. And if you wanted to switch, you would do that at the beginning of the next school year rather than quarter by quarter. Who cannot receive ESA funds? By law, the qualified student or the account holder for that account cannot receive funds. So we have chosen to go back to the statute and restrict who cannot receive funds by what is in the statute. Previously, you could not have hired another ESA parent if they were doing tutoring services or some type of teaching services or any type of services. They also restricted previous administrations, restricted different types of immediate family members, whether it be uncles, aunts, people live in the home, grandparents. There's a lot of different people who could not receive ESA funds. So we decided to go back to what the law says, which says the qualified student and the ESA account holder, which is defined as parent, step-parent, or guardian, would not be able to receive those funds. With the expansion of the ESA program, it limits service providers very much when you say that a student, a parent of another student who has an ESA is not able to receive those funds. Next, I want to clarify the definition of curriculum is what is in statute, which you also have reflected in rule. You've heard some comments today, and we've heard comments in the past about the word formal that no longer exists in our handbook. The definition of curriculum remains a wording in statute. The only change to curriculum is now the fact that we allow parents to prepare their own curriculum. And on the next slide, as I presented to you before, this is an example of parent-prepared curriculum because I know that everyone wanted an example to see how easy that is. We have plenty of qualified teachers in our parent community, and we want them to be able to do this. This is an expansion from what we've had in the past because this has not been allowed, but we feel that it's best to allow parents to prepare their own curriculum for their own child. The other part that we've spoken about in the past is having parents attest every time that they are using the funds, that it is for their individual child's education. And rather than do that through the approval process, we've removed that from the processes in the handbook. And you will now see, I don't know if you can read that okay. You will now see this at the button every time you submit an expense. It says, by submitting an expense, you are attesting that it is for your individual student's education pursuant to ARS 15-2402, reminding parents that this is for their individual student's education. The reason that is important is because we hear over and over and over again, I haven't read my contract or I haven't read the law, so I didn't know. which is fine, and they return the funds if something has gone wrong. But we do this on a very much a daily basis. So we've removed it and put it there. State statute allows your ESA funds after graduating from high school to be used for tuition or fees and required textbooks for an eligible post-secondary school or institution. Previous handbooks have stated the word, restricted it to being in state. So we have aligned the wording now in the handbook to be exactly what it says in statute. And I won't read the whole thing, but at the end it says an accredited private post-secondary institution. And that's what the rules, or that's the rules and the law both state that. So we did change that. However, just because we remove the in-state portion of that, the wording doesn't mean the intent is going to change. As you know, this board and an administrative administrative law judge ruled to uphold the state board and the ADE's decision to not allow it to be out of state. And I think you all have a copy of that decision. And so we can change it so it doesn't say in state, but just know that the Department of Education will be abiding by that and not approving anything that's out of state. The next several slides are going to be about the educational and psychological evaluations. Some of it will be the same information and some of it will be some new regarding a new portion of the law. So a parent can present one of the documents that I've listed: an individualized education plan, multidisciplinary evaluation team document, a 504 plan, independent education evaluation for purposes of determining ESA eligibility. So we've stated those in the handbook. The new statute talks about that process a little bit more. I want to clarify, I've received confirmation multiple times that the new statute.
Sorry, 1 second. My Zoom just crashed, so the meeting is no longer live. So I have to bring it back online. It just happened. Sorry about that.
Just wait. Yeah, just let us know. Yeah, we'll take a pause.
Okay, we are ready. Sorry about that.
Thank you for that, Jessica. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So the new statute, ARS 15-2403J, it deals with educational evaluations. I've received confirmation multiple times that this section only refers to students who are already in the ESA program as a child with a disability. So I want to make that clear before we discuss it. So part of the new statute says that a parent could contact the Department of Education for a third-party vendor for an update on that. The previous administration posted an RFP for that on November 30th. It closed on December 28th, and we reviewed it when we received it. I think it was mid-January, and that needs to be refreshed. There was one person who bid for it. Without all of the discussion around that, the department has chosen to refresh an RFP with some new language, and we'll get it out there and advertise it a bit more. So it is our intent to have a third-party vendor.
I'm so sorry to interrupt again. It seems like there's a challenge with Zoom right now, and it just happened again. So I was appropriate to take a break.
Yeah. I've got just about a quarter to 11, and maybe we'll take a break until 11 a.m. and see. And is that okay? You're okay. All right, so let's take a 15-minute break, and I'll try to get the meeting started right at 11. Thank you. Good job. We do. Yes, we do.
Hey. Jessica, are we on the last side?
We're good.
That's okay. Yeah.
All right, as promised, I'm going to reconvene us at 11 and appreciate everyone's good work to get us back up and on Zoom and streaming and so with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Curso.
Thank you, Dr. Corr, Superintendent, and members of the board. Right where we left off, the new statute ARS 15-2403J, as I mentioned, specifically deals with students who are already in the ESA program with a child with a disability. So I need to clarify that because there's a lot of confusion around that. I mentioned before, and I don't know if we captured it, so I want to just repeat that we do intend to issue another RFP specifically for a third-party vendor for evaluations. And the previous administration did do that from November 30th to December 28th, but we need to refresh that process. So I'm working with people to do that now. As you know, if we don't have a third-party vendor, then it goes to the county superintendents. I spoke with them on April 17th, all of them, during the meeting to let them know our intent to have a third-party vendor. And then of course, if a third party, if there's a list, not a list at the counties, then parents can go to a qualified examiner, licensed physician, psychiatrist, or psychologist is what the statute says, to conduct and have an independent education evaluation for purposes of ESA. You'll see in the note in red, when a student leaves the ESA program to return to a public school, it's very important that they know that that independent evaluation, education evaluation that was done only for purposes of ESA does not follow them to the public school. So that's clear. It's really important that everyone knows that. Talk a little bit about that in a minute. On page 34, it was brought up as a question to add that sentence into the paragraph that was presented regarding the independent education evaluations. So that's been added. And one of the things that we do when we receive an evaluation is we look to see what the categories are that are listed, no matter what type of documentation we get. And so once we see that, we see the highest funded category, and that's what is issued to the ESA student. If you look on the next screen, you'll see the document. It's kind of small. It's been on our website for years, and we refresh it every year. Different categories for disabilities. This changes. The reason it's not in the handbook is because once the legislature approves a state budget and that budget process goes through, we don't have that amount of money of what that will be for the next year before the handbook goes into effect. So as you'll see, there's wide ranges for each of the categories. And the reason that is because, as you know, this is funded for ESA students at 90% of what the state legislature funds public schools for that category, dependent on the grade, disability, the grade, and the school district that the student would be going to. That's why the ranges are wide. So we produce this document annually. Our IT department works with me and school finance, and we find out what the legislature is now funding the public schools. We've revised this document that always gets, well, it should be, it didn't when I first got here, it was a couple years old. We put the fresh new one up, and every time we have that new documentation and we change the funding in our IT department, it will be put on our website. So that's where that comes from. There are a lot of questions, as you heard today, and as I've heard from some of you about IDEA, the Individuals with Disability Education Act. It's very important that you and everyone understands the difference of that program in the ESA program. I worked hand in hand with our Exceptional Student Services Division for this portion of the handbook, for our guidance going forward with the attorneys and how this works. We plan to hold an open forum for anyone and everyone, especially ESA parents, to be able to understand the differences. Today, I wanted to invite Associate Superintendent Colette Chapman and a couple members of her team to be able to speak to this so that we can get some clarity, and especially some of the parents, some who are here or online who brought it up today. I think it's important that to be discussed. Here's Colette Chapman.
Good morning, President Corr, Superintendent Horn, and members. I've been asked to share some information about parentally placed students with disabilities who participate in the ESA and the use of IDEA funds, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. I am going to read an excerpt from an OSEP memorandum or Q&A, and OSEP is the Office of Special Education Programs. And the title is Serving Children with Disabilities Placed by Their Parents in Private Schools. Children with disabilities placed in private schools by their parents do not have an individual entitlement to special education and related services they would receive if they were enrolled in a public school or placed by a private school by the local education agency as a means of ensuring a free, appropriate public education is to be made available. Further, children with disabilities placed by their parents in private schools do not have the right to all of the protections under IDEA. For example, IDEA's due process procedures do not apply to issues regarding the provision of services to any particular parentally placed private school child with a disability. Parents of each children may only use IDEA due process procedures to resolve matters concerning the LEA's obligation to meet the child find requirements as noted in IDEA. So when it comes to children with disabilities being served in ESA programs, they can use funds for certain services. So for students with disabilities, grade K through 12, attending a nonprofit private school, the student would be included in the proportionate share calculation and be eligible for equitable services under the IDEA. So how this happens is after meaningful consultation with the private school, with the LEA, or with the parent, a service plan is developed, and that is what private schools go off of then in order to serve the child. Do you have any questions?
Oh, is that okay? Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry, member Kravitz, yeah, go ahead.
A comment then a question, and I hesitate to want to sound like I'm trying to be the language police, as I probably did last meeting, but I always feel like special education is not a program. I mean, it's specially designed for election that students qualify in. It's not a place, it's not a program, it's students qualify for specially designed instruction. So, because we use that term program a lot, it has legal consequences when we use that term. So I just want to throw that out there. If students qualify for special education services, not.
Thank you.
Make sure that that's correct.
That's what about the experts. Continuing, the reason why this is important that I wanted to bring this up is because when it comes to special I won't use I'm trying not to, it's equity in the habit. I won't be using the word special needs or special education because that implies that you're inside of a public school system. So that's why we say child with disabilities. And there's been several children owners and parents that have come to me saying that the services that they receive, the therapies and things that they qualify for under ESA, those are specific to the DEA. So that's why I wanted to let in our team to come to differentiate. When it comes to how that's being communicated to the public schools and how we're going to communicate to ESA, we're going to work together on doing a public forum for that. So I will keep you posted when we have that. A brief slide on access to ESA funds through our third-party financial vendor Class Wallet. I won't go into them. The reason why I have this on here, this is not a change in the handbook. It simply is to let you know that it's remained in the handbook. And so I won't go through all of those unless you have specific questions. The help desk guidance in chapter 9 of the handbook. This entire section will be obsolete May 31st. We have a new help desk ticket, and we'll call it help ticket system inside the ESA portal. And so that you know how it works, you log into ATE and you go into your ESA portal. And when you're in the portal, we will now have a new tab starting June 1st. It'll have your help desk tickets. It's not the same system inside the portal. So I just wanted to let you know, I know you wanted me to section in the handbook. And so I kept the section in the handbook, but it wasn't obsolete on May 31st. When we have all that is being custom created now, when we have that guidance, I can send it to the account holders and post it on our website. I just wanted to let you know that for the handbook. There was a list of common acronyms. There were 2 pages of them in the back of the handbook. And I just took all of the acronyms out that were not referred to in the handbook. It caused confusion as to people would see something in the acronyms and they go looking to see where it's at in the handbook. And most of them were not in the handbook. So anything that's referred to in the handbook is now on the acronym list. That was a change. And before I open for questions, I wanted to mention a couple of things to some of the board members' points before. I think it was member Catanese. So once we're done and this is finally approved, it will be translated into Spanish, as well as put accessible on our website, the handbook. There was a typo or 2 that was mentioned that has been updated. The insurance and surety bonds that is mentioned before and in previous meetings, that is in there because it's part of statute. ARS 15-2402 mentions that specifically. And then even though the handbook does deal with eligibility, I will mention we are dealing with a very difficult situation right now with the eligibility application. It has come to my attention about a month and a half, 2 months ago, that when the Universal ESA was opened, all of the tens of thousands of applications that were coming in, the previous administration chose to push them all under Universal and did not check certain requirements. So if it came in as living on an Indian reservation, you would have had to have 45 days in a public school. The staff was instructed to change it to Universal and push them through. So I have tens of thousands of applications that this is the case. I'm working with the attorneys on trying to find a solution. If we have to go back to 25, 30,000 applications and look at the original intent, you can't see it on the application because it was changed. And so this is how it had been processed. Those same students would qualify under Universal, same amount of money, same distribution of an award, but their original application category was changed. So when I found this out, I immediately started the conversation of what we're going to do about that. So for now, the application is set so that the same people were not being rejected. When we made that change, we had 186 people that had just that week applied under a different category, and we completed it and said, you need 45 days in a public school. You need to respond to us within the next 5 days to confirm that. Otherwise, you'll have to apply under Universal. So half of those reapplied, the other half got denied and then had to reapply. simply, I don't know that they got our communication. That being said, any child who applies for in the category of disability, that is the only one that would be a different amount. The 45 days is required in a public school beforehand. The previous administration had universal special education, and the universal special education was just get them in the system. All the applications were pushed through, and later take the document that they presented and then change the funding category. So this is very unfortunate, and we've been trying to work on this for the last couple of months. We're not sure exactly where we're going with that, but I'm working with the attorneys and the team to figure out the right thing to do, because those students definitely need to be categorized appropriately. If they chose to be university, that's one thing, but if they had 45 days in a public school, because that didn't change in the law, and we would need to categorize them appropriately. So going back from August 17th received applications to it was till the end of the year, into a little bit into January. We're working on that now. Thank you for allowing me to present this morning. I'm happy to take any questions.
I think I'm gonna do it this way, so sit tight. As I referenced earlier, I'd like each member of the board, because we spend so very much time on this, to have an opportunity to ask questions and or share their thoughts. I will work from my left and call on each member, and then I'll move to the members online, and then I will move from right to left. So with that, Member Kervikis, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you, Mr. President and Christine. Thank you for the presentation. Can you elaborate? I have a couple questions, but can you elaborate on one of the things you just said about that it'll be translated in Spanish and then accessible? Do you mean accessible on the website? What is accessible?
Oh. Dr. Corrs, Superintendent Horn, and members of the board. Yes, on the website. So we only print 20 or so actual physical copies, or maybe just a few more than that for the staff. But we don't make it available unless someone asks in person. So I'm talking about the website, yes.
To that point, you've mentioned a couple times that you hear often from parents that they haven't read that contract. As you all know, I like to advocate for students with disabilities, but there are parents with disabilities as well, or parents that just don't have strong literacy skills. So is there a way that we can make sure it's literally accessible? That it's, that it's written in a that it's written in a different languages. What's the term accessible? That we really give some thought to make sure, because that manual is daunting. Read government stuff for a living, but that's a daunting manual, and it's long. And even though you guys done a good job describing all the acronyms and stuff, I think there's, maybe if it's just not only a translation, if it's a webinar, if it's training, something that we can do to make sure that it's really accessible to all parents.
Dr. Corrs, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, I agree. I almost called you doctor, sorry. Member Kervikis, I agree with you. And I'm glad that parents are having a difficult time, are calling us. I encourage that because we want to be able to talk them through it. We want to be able to have webinars online and in person to go through it, to ask questions so that people understand. When I say accessible, I'm speaking to the ADA compliant part of it. But I agree at every level. I'm often asked if I speak 53,000 dialects of ESA. And I think it's kind of a silly way of saying it, but so many times when you're talking to someone, they're not understanding what's in the handbook or what's on the website or how to use this program. So I agree with you.
My second comment would be, is, I've been really focused on the procedure. And anytime there's rulemaking in any government agency, it's standard procedure that you see the changes. I call it track changes. I use that Microsoft Word term. I think we should be having that every time this document comes. It was, again, to the point of, it was difficult for me. I couldn't really get through it until we got our red line copy, which thank you pretty much got. But that same thing for parents. I mean, there's no way to know what the changes are. And they were a lot. Some of them technical, conforming, I get it. But there were a lot of changes that was really hard to see. So to the extent that I can recommend or really insist that we get red line copies for the public as well moving forward, I'd like to say that. my understanding that the legislature kind of inserted the state board in all those projects, so the parents and constituents had a place. And I really appreciate that. And I appreciate everybody who's come to testify throughout this. And I was growing more comfortable until the STO changed. I'm not taking a legal position on the change at all, but it was kind of last minute. I didn't see it till this last version, and it's a pretty substantive change. Getting really good public feedback, or I don't know. That was, and again, if it wasn't a red line change, people may not have even seen it. So I just wanted to say that I'm, yeah, that being at the procedure of it, I'm not taking a position on it legally, but the procedural aspect of it made me really uncomfortable. And look at my question. Oh, the status of the online searchable database. We've heard that referenced a couple of times again today. The status of the searchable online database. Is it going to come back, or?
Dr. Kors, Superintendent Horn, and members of the board, the allowable list that we posted on March 17th is the most detailed list we can, that the department has put out. Is allowable. The previous, we can't use the previous list. There's many things on there that don't align to state statute. So that's the reason why, to be an additional expense. The reason why we came up with our own. It's pretty extensive. We also came up with a disallowables list. That's on there as well to give guidance for that. And so as far as being the old way of doing it, the way it was on the website, we won't be doing it in that way, but we were hoping the March 17th list would give guidance.
Thank you for that answer. I don't know if that meets what the rules say. I think the rules say specifically an online searchable database.
Dr. Corman, you can search it if you need the old-fashioned way, control find, and type it in there. I mean, it is searchable in that way.
And my last comment is just out there. Inappropriate explicit material is on one credit.
Dr. Corman, inexplicit material, inappropriate and explicit material is specifically referring to pornography. It's not talking about sex education, but that's for the parents to decide. And obviously that is an educational. So that's specifically what it's talking about. Thank you for asking that question. And I've said that publicly several times in the last few weeks.
And I don't know if it's possible, but I'm wondering if there's some kind of, thank you for that answer. But if there's some way to put some kind of statutory definition in there, I don't know if we have definitions of that somewhere outside of Title 15 that might bring more clarity, because a lot of people can that.
Thank you, Member Kravickas. Member Meyerson.
Thank you for your presentation. And again, just thank you to all of the parents and community members for continuing to come to public and sharing their perspective. I just have a question and want to comment. I am concerned a little bit about this searchable list. And so just wanted to understand a little bit more, especially to the point of accessibility. I think, yes, many would understand how to use Control F, but that isn't as accessible, especially for families who might have a challenge with identifying those allowable expenses. And we've heard now consistently from families that that list is so critical for them as they're making decisions about their education. So if you could just explain to me a little bit more why it cannot be online and accessible in a way that is truly searchable.
Dr. Horn, Superintendent Horn, and members of the board, we can take the formatting of the list that we have now and work to put it in the searchable type functionality that was there when we do our website. The whole Department of Education is in the middle of redoing our website. So we can look at the possibility of doing it that way. The items on the list would be the same. So yes, I will look into that.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And then my second is a comment. I think all public schools across the state are required to have all of their staff have fingerprint clearance cards. And it's my understanding that this would be a statutory change rather than a rule. And so just wanted to name it as something, Executive Director Ross, and for the department, that as there is an option again to put forth additional recommendations for statutory change, the idea that fingerprint clearance cards would be required or some form of background check is required for anybody providing service to children.
President Core, Member Meyerson, we can add that to our discussion for the latest legislative agenda for next year.
Thank you, Member Meyerson. Vice President Haley.
Thank you so much, Executive. Please remind me how to correctly pronounce because I want to add syllables. Accurso. Thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you again for all the moms and dads and caregivers and community members that have expressed support for the ESA program and also provided their feedback during this extensive process. The question that I have that was not addressed in the handbook was the department's use of debit cards. I know that the department has expressed an interest in not allowing new debit cards, but existing account holders could use them. I'm a little concerned that families that might benefit from the use of debit cards, particularly in rural communities or those that have students with disabilities and have to really curate their child's education, that they would not be able to benefit from that going forward. So I'm interested to know what is the department's position and how will you continue to address that?
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, and members of the board, and Vice President Haley. Thank you for asking that question. So our position is that we've paused on all debit card issuance, new issuance. Again, I know I always say this to get some context. We have 53,000 students in the program, 17,000 have debit cards and 16,000 actively use them. So just to paint the picture. We definitely are looking at ways to automate that process and looking into the future to see how we could. The administration behind one transaction, which I know I've probably told you many times, is very difficult when you don't have proper documentation or any at all. And I can certainly, if I just did now, and I can certainly just tell all of those parents that I'm gonna send them to collections, and then you have tens of thousands of collections here, and then the Attorney General's office would have more. So I just want to make sure that we're doing this properly. We're looking forward into the future. I'm very much focused on what automation and technology can do. I don't know what that looks like for the future. We're not, picking and choosing who gets debit cards. It's really important that everyone have access to their ESA funds. So they do have access to items and some services in the marketplace, and they definitely do through the direct pay option. And that's throughout the whole state, rural and everyone. So our position is trying to figure out what that would look like for the future. But as far as the program going from 13,000 to, as of today, 53,000, I mean, it's impossible to be able to, with a growing program, to be able to administer it the same way we have in years past. So that's where we're at.
I fully appreciate that. Yes, the program has exponentially increased. At the same time, we have 32 million individuals across the country using health savings accounts. And I feel like there are very similar parallels. And so as we think about a new vendor, a new opportunity, I do think that there are creative ways while maintaining fiscal accountability, as well as maintaining the ability of parents to curate their kids' education, to think through all of those things. I feel like if the state legislature has entrusted moms and dads and caregivers to be able to control their children's education, we have an opportunity to be able to do that, particularly through the competitive bidding process. So I would really appreciate that. I'd like to associate myself with Member Kavickas and Meyerson's questions about just general transparency. It is really, really important that when we get these substantive changes, even if it is in order to comply with legislative change and rulemaking, that we get a red line version. The fact that Kat Ruiz on the SB staff had to create that was a little frustrating. We didn't get that until over the weekend. And just having that information helps us as board members make informed decisions rather than having to go back and forth between was the Martin version, the version. So I really think that going forward when the changes are going, or how we also address that. My last question, or my last comment perhaps, is while it was just a line, the STO ESA change, just from a process perspective, in my mind, is substantive. And I would have appreciated that we learned about this change that the department was anticipating making at the March meeting, where we had an opportunity for moms and dads and caregivers to provide feedback on that. It is substantive, and to be able to only have from, I think, April 14th or 15th, when we got the draft handbook until present. That's not a lot of time. And it also doesn't give moms and dads and, again, caregivers to be able to have that opportunity to provide the change and feedback. So these types of things, these last minute sort of puts my little hair on fire and just like, oh, that's substantive, and perhaps I don't think it was the department's intent that it be a last minute thing. But there's also skepticism, and it makes me think, oh, were you trying to put this by so that we didn't notice? So that was a concern of mine, and just wanted to express my concern and a little bit of frustration.
Dr. Cora, Superintendent Horn, Member Haley, I agree with you. The reason why it was late is because I was waiting for clarification from the attorneys, and it took quite a while to get that. And that's one of the reasons why we moved the date from the 13th to the 14th. So when I sent that information in an email ahead of what was coming, I wanted to make sure you got it as soon as possible. Got it very late on the 13th. So I totally agree with you. I look forward to a longer runway next year.
Thank you, Vice President Haley. Member Clark, comments or questions?
Yeah, I actually, can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you just fine, yes.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm a little under the weather. I actually have no questions for the director. I do have a statement that I'll just go ahead and read now that relates to what my intentions are as far as my vote goes.
Please.
Thank you. I do want to thank the staff for their work on this agenda item over the past several months. It has been a lot. The sheer volume of the public comment, both written and in person, has been more than I've ever seen on an issue since I've been on the board. It's clearly an incredibly important topic to families, of course, who are the primary and the most important stakeholder in this process. There's many issues, I think, with the draft handbook. I think parents have done an absolutely fantastic job providing very explicit and specific, both written and public comment related to all of those issues. As my other members have already noted, the fact that the department did not provide a red-lined copy with the latest changes to the board or for the public is extremely concerning to me and very troubling. There was no way for anyone, unless they ran everything through a PDF program, to track changes. And thankfully, the state board staff did go ahead and provide the red line copy when ADE failed to do so. But I want to highlight just my number one issue of deep concern right now related to this handbook. This handbook changes the ability of parents to use ESA and tuition tax credit scholarships in the same year. Now, this is a change from the current administrative procedures at ADE, and it's how parents, schools, private schools, and STOs were advised by the department as recently as this past fall. And also, as I mentioned, goes against 10 years of department administrative procedures. In an email to the board, the director mentioned that she'd spoken to multiple STOs, and that's attached to the agenda for anyone that wants to look at it, that she'd spoken to multiple STOs and that they expressed the desire for ESA and STO use in the same year to be stopped. I obviously personally am very curious which STOs express that desire to prohibit ESA and STO use in the same year. But the document also reads that the director discussed this with the attorneys, and that the director was advised that the statute can, quote, reasonably be interpreted to prohibit the receipt of ESA funds in the same year as a student accepting an STO. So now we're changing 10 years of administrative procedure based on a decision to reasonably interpret the law in a completely opposite way. That benefits potentially STOs in private schools, but not ESA families. And so I'm concerned that AD is focused on potentially pleasing STOs in private schools who do have an administrative, challenge and opportunity dealing with the ESA and STO issue, but that we're not focusing on what has been done for 10 years and we're not focusing on what's best for ESA parents. So just to kind of recap on this issue, this was not in any prior handbook drafts. It was not redlined for the board or the public. There was no ESA stakeholder discussion on this very significant issue. There was apparently discussion with private schools and STOs. There's been no analysis or data shown that the concerns addressed are actually happening. And if they were, the department could still work with parents or schools to reconcile them. The only person that this will impact or people that this will impact is families, Arizona families who are either present ESA families or maybe future ESA families. And this will negatively impact special education students the most. Those families are the most likely to switch to an ESA if they're on an STO and they get a diagnosis, and the Empowerment Scholarship either provides more flexibility or a higher award amount. They're the ones that are most likely mid-year to make a switch to an Empowerment Scholarship that will give them more funding. So obviously, I don't think that we can remove it right at this time, but that along with some stuff related to associated goods are of great concern to me. So I now want to just point out kind of the responsibility of the board and the different options that I've looked at. I feel frustrated. I feel like as a board, we're stuck. I'm told on one hand that the board doesn't supposedly have any authority to make any amendments to the handbook, no matter how much negative feedback we receive or how incomplete we see it, or even if we see it violating the rules, that we supposedly just don't have the authority to make any changes. That doesn't make sense to me, and I disagree with that interpretation. And then we're also told that on the one hand, we have to accept something by May 1st, however flawed or in violation of the rules that it may be. But I believe that there are substantive changes that were made in last year's handbook. And the rule does not allow us, our own rule does not allow us to approve substantive changes, but once every 3 years. So there's just, in conclusion, there's three main reasons that I will not be voting to approve the handbook. This includes the substantive changes that I mentioned, the STO ESA and the latest draft, which have not been noted and there's been no vetting of until this meeting. I'd also like to note that under our rules, R7 to 15031, this is where it says that the board shall limit substantive changes to the handbook to once every 3 years. And the final thing, which is a little bit of a nitty-gritty type of thing, but it's very important in my reasoning for not being able to approve, is that under Arizona law, so ARS 15243K, it says that on or before July 1st of each year, the department shall develop an applicant and participant handbook that includes information relating to policies and processes of Arizona Empowerment Scholarships. The policy handbook shall comply with the rules adopted by the State Board of Education, and the department shall post this on the website. So I have to vote no on this because I don't believe that the handbook complies with the rules, which is what I believe the statute says must be done. That concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Clark. Dr. Robbins, any questions or comments?
No.
Thank you, sir. And Dr. Clary, any questions or comments?
Yes, thank you for that presentation. It was very enlightening. But I do have a question. It's already been asked, but I need to get a little bit more clarification. My concern are the rural schools and the debit cards. Where I come from, we have ranchers who have students on ESA. And we're talking, they cannot get vendors from the city. They're going to have to get local vendors if possible. A lot of those local vendors not accept class wallet, and the parents themselves cannot pay or cannot do the reimbursement. Right? How are we going to support these ranchers, these 1,000-acre ranches that have their students in ESA? What can we do to help them?
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, and Member Clay, I'd love to be able to hear the reasons why they wouldn't go on Class Wallet. Inside the direct pay vendor option in Class Wallet, anyone who wants to provide services, a school, service provider, bookstore, I mean, just any business, anyone, any individual as well, can sign up to be a vendor inside of it. And then our office looks at it, if there's some type of accreditation needed, we make sure it's there. When we approve it, they have linked their bank account to Class Wallet. So when a parent presents an invoice and we pay it, goes directly into their account. It is the most quick and efficient way for service providers to be approved, to receive payment. That being said, I love having conversations with now ranchers, but anyone who doesn't want to go on Class Wallet. I understand that there's been issues in the past. I do understand, especially being a parent on the program previous to me being in this position, but I would definitely like to see them get paid quickly, and direct pay option would be that option for them. So maybe a good conversation with them, the service providers would help.
One of the issues is that there's an unofficial vote of non-confidence for Class Wallet, and that has spread throughout the whole state. Okay, including way down south. So you get vendors and professionals down there where I'm at, far and few in between. Like there's no way they're not gonna do it, right? Which puts the students and the families in a very bad position. They're in the middle. So we need to figure that out. Okay, because we're for the one and the many, right? Okay, so how that's an issue, and we can't just let it go by. That is an issue with a lot of our rural ESA students and parents. Vendors are not, they don't have any confidence in the system. All right, so with that, okay, it's a challenge. So with that, we need to figure out how we're gonna meet that challenge.
Dr. Core Superintendent, Board Member, Dr. Clay, I agree with you that there are a lot of issues. I definitely had a list of them when I got here, and the list has only gotten longer. So definitely trying to day by day work on it. I can tell you currently across the street at the Department of Education, when invoices come in and the vendors are in Class Wallet, they get paid right away. So it is a problem that I'm very well aware of and we work on every day. I'm hoping with, looking into the future, as Member Haley had mentioned with the bids and all of those types of things, not speaking to any of them, but in the future, which is in the near future, the issues hopefully can be dealt with as we look at the future, no matter who the vendor is.
What message should I take back to the people?
Dr. Core Superintendent and Member Clay, that I actively, as the director, care about them, would love to hear from them, would definitely want to try and make sure we can get that these issues resolved. I don't work for Class Wallet. I can't speak to Class Wallet. I inherited this. I definitely think that I work with them every day to make it easier for students as well. I would love to be able to have a conversation to see how we can help.
So you understand where I'm going with the debit cards. This is, if there's something other than debit cards, if there's some other type of system that can be used, that is appropriate. Because right now I'm gonna go back and tell them, oh, well, I have no answer for them, and which is something I don't like to do. So it would be, if you would have some sort of, this is what we're going to be doing in the future, or we're looking at changing it so that everybody could, I'm just looking for an answer so that I can take back to this demographic, this group that's growing also. Okay, and I'm not getting an answer of at least we're going to change or we're going to something so that I can bring something back. We're the fixer of problems, and I appreciate everything that you and Superintendent Horn are doing. I really do. I'm just bringing you more challenges, and I'm bringing back what constituents are specifically talking to me about. Okay, you need to figure it out.
Is definitely, if you look at the RFP, some of those questions are that the Treasurer's Office posted. Some of those questions are trying to be worked on. But I'll dovetail this to something that Member Haley said about the HSA and how that's so easily used within healthcare. Those conversations have happened too. That's not something that we can change overnight, but something that the department is open to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Clay. Dr. Hagerman, any comments or questions?
I have some questions about independent evaluation process and group weights. So you said today that to be in special ed and get ESA, you have to have an initial special ed eval now. So is that correct? Or could someone get into special ed through purely an IEE and and no initial eval process.
Dr. Core Superintendent Horn, and member, your Dr. Hagerman. Yes, you actually can have an independent education evaluation to be eligible for, as a student with a disability for the ESA program. That can follow you to the public school, but that now can be presented outside. But the IE is specifically for purposes of ESA. Now, if there's an IE that's done in a public school, and that process does happen, they can bring that to us as well. So IE for public school and ESA purposes are two different things. Statute doesn't define them. So and we've gone through that many times with the attorneys. They are two different things, but for purposes of the ESA, you can get it from a qualified provider, which is a physician, psychologist, or psychiatrist.
So earlier in the meeting, you said something about they had to do the 45 days in a public school before they come into the ESA. So talk me through that.
Dr. Core Superintendent Horn and Dr. Hagerman, the law didn't change for students with disabilities. We still have to present for the 45 days in public school before they can be eligible. However, when Oak Universal opened, a lot of parents just applied to be universal or were pushed into being universal by the department. And then once they were on universal, they can present this documentation later and then be transferred. I think it looks like a loophole type situation, being what was done in the past and what's the right thing to do through statute and what we're doing now. We're trying to reconcile that. I hope that helps answer your question.
And I guess the last question, I guess two questions, but in ESA, independent eval, does the ESA does the eval have to provide documentation about how the student relates to the category of disability, or just that they qualify for that disability?
Dr. Core Superintendent Horn and Dr. Hagerman, great question. The evaluation tells us what category they are in. That doesn't tell us what services or therapies that they qualify for. That would be from a qualified service provider. Unless, for some reason, in their IEP, MET document, not always, or IE literally indicates for a special therapy or item that would be needed. If it does, then they would be qualified. Otherwise, they have to go to the service providers.
So I'm talking about the eligibility itself. So are they just checking the box that says the student qualifies for this, or are they providing data that shows that they qualify for that disability?
Dr. Superintendent Horn and Dr. Hagerman, sometimes we'll get a letter from a physician that says, this letterhead says this child has autism. That evaluation, because there's no definition of evaluation, qualifies them for an ESA. What they can do with that money when they have it, it depends on what is indicated for by service providers. Does that help?
So that's how they define a disability. Do they have to show anything, a need for specialized designed instruction, or just say the label that the funding goes to, and then that's what qualifies them?
Dr. Core Superintendent or Dr. Hagerman, the evaluation process gives the funding category for funding. If something in that documentation refers and indicates for something like that, then we could accept that. But if it doesn't, then we're looking for qualified service providers for the parent to present that from them. And then that talks about the services and therapies that they are eligible for.
But my last one is, you also mentioned 504. There's not a group B weight for a 504, so how would that be utilized to establish a group B weight?
Dr. Core Superintendent and Dr. Hagerman, that is actually on the IT and school finance side for the funding portion of it. I don't have the information of how it's done. It's just that the school finance department at the Department of Education comes up with that amount, and then our IT team takes 90% of that in our algorithm when the awards are done. But I can look into it and ask school finance.
For ESAs, there is a funding weight for 504, I guess.
It's on the list, so
Okay. No other questions for me.
Thank you, Dr. Hagerman. Superintendent Horn.
Yes, thank you, Christine. First of all, I want to give Dr. Clay a very specific, direct answer to the question she's raised. And the answer is direct payment. Any provider in a rural area that's not already in Class Wallet can apply to the department and be approved for direct payment. Once they're approved for direct payment, any request that comes in, the department will pay them will pay them directly, immediately. So that is the answer to the problem you raised, it's direct payment. I agree with the comments that have been made about red line documents, and in the future, we need to be sure that anything that comes from the department, either to the public or to the board, is redlined with their changes. And my Chief Deputy Margaret Dugan is here in the front row, and I'll ask her to get a memo out to the appropriate people to be sure that anytime we have a document that has changes, they have redline to indicate what those changes are. And also the point about fingerprints, I will ask the people that in our office that deals with the legislature to bring to their attention the question of fingerprint, and it'd be up to the legislature to make that value decision, but we will bring that issue to them. I want to talk about the extent to which our director, Christina Curso, has worked very hard to incorporate all reasonable requests for changes in the handbook. This is the fourth meeting where we've had approximately the same number of comments that we had here today, one in February, two in March, and then today in April. After every single meeting, Christina's worked very hard to make changes that accommodate every reasonable request that's consistent with the legislation. We have to be consistent with the legislation. Christine works 7 days a week. I know that because the weekend before the last weekend, she spent the whole weekend making the most recent changes for the handbook. She comes to work at 6:45 in the morning and she stays till after 5. She works very hard and she's been focused on meeting all reasonable requests from the public. Her family itself has been a part of the ESA program, and she has a lot of sympathy with all the parents, and she tries to do everything she can to accommodate any comments that are made either by board members or by members of the public. And a lot of changes have been made, as I think it was already noted, to try to meet those questions that were raised. I think the only other thing I wanted to address was the question raised by some public school advocates that the department is focused too much on ESAs and not on public schools, because after all, 110,000 of our students are in public schools and 50,000 have ESAs. And the office to which I was elected is the superintendent of public instruction. There's been news coverage of our controversies because the news likes controversies, and this has been the big controversy, the comments we heard here today. But well over 90% of my time is spent to encourage our public schools and help our public schools achieve excellence. We have a lot of excellent schools. We want to spread that out. And the news media can ask any member of our department, and they will tell you that I have, when I took office, I emphasized our job, our number one priority is to improve academic outcomes in the public schools and to help them do that. I have a letter from a consultant who specializes in failing schools, saying that for many years the schools had no help, that school improvement money was handled with what the schools described as paperwork hell, where they got long questionnaires, they answered them, they were corrected, they went back and forth, and sometimes the money didn't get there in time to really be useful. What we have done is implement improvement teams. We're going to help the schools. We're a service agency, and we are sending people out to the schools to improve, help the schools improve, so that we can raise academic outcomes for everyone, for the public schools, which is the vast majority of our students, and for ESAs, for those students whose needs are not being met in the public schools. We care about those students and we want them to have an option. But anyone in the Department of Education will tell you that I have emphasized that our overwhelming priority is to help the public schools achieve excellence. And anything not directed toward that end we've eliminated and we've directed all of our energy toward helping achieve more excellent public schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Horn. I'll have a couple of brief comments and then I will seek a motion and I think we'll do a roll call vote, if that's all right, Executive Director Ross. My comments are as follows. I think the process has worked. Process is working. This is a work in progress. To the many parents that have come to speak to us, not just over the last 3 months, but in my 6+ years on this board, hundreds and hundreds of parents with all divergent views, but you've spoken passionately, you've spoken articulately, and we have listened. I do want to thank ADE staff for responding to a great many of those concerns, a great many of those comments. I think the handbook before us today is a document that demonstrates that great progress has been made. It is not a perfect document. I too have very strong concerns about the debit card and its lack of universality. I think I just made up a word. It's universal use. I think that's super important. The red line versions, absolutely, right? We just have to be better, right? We just have to be better in communicating. Again, it is not a perfect document, but I feel it is important that we do not let perfection be in the way of progress. My intent is to vote yes. With that, I will move on to ask for a motion to approve the ESA handbook for the 23-24 school year. Once we have a motion on the floor, we can discuss further. And then again, I would ask for a roll call vote. So, Chairman, please, Superintendent.
I don't see Dr. Robbins on the screen. Could somebody call over there and let them know that we're about to vote?
For Superintendent Board members of the board, we've been in constant communication with Dr. Robbins and with his assistant Cody. We don't believe Dr. Robbins will be present for the vote, but we are double checking now.
Okay.
We've been in probably 7 times during the meetings. So
Okay, thank you to the both for that. Again, do I have a motion to approve the ESA handbook for the 23-24 school year?
I move that I so move.
So moved by Superintendent Horn. Do I have a second?
I second.
Second by Dr. Clay. Thank you. Any conversation, further discussion? Member Kravickas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I remember the term I was looking for, plain language.
Plain language.
That's the term I was looking for, to make sure that the manual is in plain language.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Okay, Executive Director Ross, if you would call the roll, please.
The President Core, call roll for the votes. So I'll start with you, President Core. I vote yes. Vice President Haley.
Yes.
Superintendent Horn.
Yes.
Member Katniss is not present. Member Clark.
No.
Dr. Clay.
Yes.
Dr. Hagerman.
I'm going to explain my vote just briefly. I do have concerns about using IEs outside of like normal special ed process, but I've been told that's allowable. But I think it opens up a lot of problems, both for districts on the back end and for parents not getting the data and the information they need to kind of for an evaluation process. But I vote yes.
Member Kravickas.
May I explain my vote?
Of course, yeah.
Mr. President, fellow members, I'm torn. I totally appreciate how much work Director Curson has done in the past 4 months. But I feel like parts of it don't meet our rules. And the STO, again, I appreciate that you were waiting for an attorney's opinion, but we didn't even know that issue was on the table. So I didn't get an opportunity, or we didn't get an opportunity to hear from stakeholders, because I think there is going to be a big impact to families. So I'm very concerned about that. And I think at this time I'm going to have to vote no.
Member Meyerson.
Yes.
And is Dr. Robbins with us?
Executive Director Rossi is not in the meeting.
Thank you, Jessica. So Dr. Core, we're fine. We have 6 yes votes, 3 no votes, and 2 members that were absent.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes. I will move us on to item 5B of the general session. Really a good news story to be shared here. So this is presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding the A to F accountability business rules for the 22-23 school year. Director Ross.
President Core, Superintendent Horn, members, thank you. Up next, we have a presentation of the AFF accountability business rules for this school year, so for the 22-23 school year. Prior to bringing up representatives from the department, I do just want to say one of the reasons that you mentioned this is a celebratory in some way item is that historically business rules have been presented either right before or after letter grades have been released, and thanks to the good work of Sean Smith and his team at the Department of Education, this is the early rules that have been presented to the board. So we have Sean Smith, Dr. Joseph Guzman, and his team to present.
Good to see you. Please.
Likewise, President Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, thank you for having me. Really happy to be here today. Again, just want to give a shout out to everyone who's worked on this process. Sean and Jessica in particular have been tremendous help as we've organized what is a complicated document. And so with the feedback from the technical advisory committees, people in the field, we're really confident that we've got something here that will be helpful for those who are going to need it. So just as a quick outline of what we're going to look at, we'll take a quick hit just looking at the changes proposed in the 2022-2023 section of the State Board Accountability 5-year plan. We'll do the traditional model overview to look at the weights, and then we'll go through the changes that we've made to the business rules and the models. And those fall into 3 broad categories. The first and foremost is the ones that were anticipated and called for on the 5-year accountability plan. The biggest chunk by far is just some updates that we've made for general ease of use and clarity. And then we have a final one that we're proposing adjustment to the 95% tested rule and penalty there. So quickly just taking a look at what's on the 5-year accountability plan. I'll reference this slide at several points just to mention, this is where we're kind of coming from. As we've met with board staff, with members of the technical advisory committee, what we really felt was wanted to be the focus of this year's accountability rules, or business rules and models, was adherence to and consistency with the 5-year plan. We think at this point, testing is just completing, and that consistency and stability can be a real benefit, especially as we head into accountability season, as we look forward to appeals and everything. We wanted to provide that level of consistency and not change things as people had kind of that outline. And that 5-year accountability plan has been really appreciated in the field, so we wanted to stick with that. The models, as you can see, look pretty much identical to what they have looked like or what they looked like last year. The weights remain the same. The only change that we'll really see, and we'll talk about a little bit more, is to the traditional high school model, and that's due to the ACT testing. The juniors that are going to take the ACT test this year, the last time they took a state test was in 7th grade. So there's some planned adjustments to the growth component there, since we won't have that typical measurement to do growth in the way you normally do. But otherwise, the models look identical to what they did last year. The first section of changes, like I mentioned, we'll go over what was called for in the 5-year accountability plan. These will probably be a review for most of us. And as I said, they were expected, but we'll just kind of go over what they look like. First of all, K-8 traditional model. The call is normally in most years, we'll have 2 measures of growth. We'll have the target element, the SGT, and we'll have the percentile element, the SGP. This year, we will only have the SGP element. That's the one that compares how well kids have grown compared to peers who scored similarly on a test last year. We don't have that target element yet because this will be our third year of data for AASA. And so Dr. Biederbender, who's our guru on that, is going to help us establish those targets. We'll be able to publish those so the field kind of knows where do these kids need to be on track for growth in order to meet proficiency. And that is listed to come back in the 5-year plan for next year for K-8. And then it'll come later down the line for traditional once we get those 3 years of data on ACT as well. Let's see. We did take a look at acceleration readiness, the EL and special education components, just to make sure that there wouldn't be any data inconsistencies, that those would have all the data that we need to go forward this year. Those all look good, and for the foreseeable future, we don't anticipate any problems. With the EL data, the standards are being set this year on the new version of the test. So the one thing that we can kind of expect is those are going to come in around July, and that data will be available to the field at a later timeline. Our team have been tremendous about communicating with us up front about the timelines there, what the process looks like. So we anticipate that should go quite smoothly once we get the data in July. Next, 9-12. This is probably the biggest change that we'll see to any of the models. In 2018, 2019, we had a similar situation, and we're adopting the same exact methodology for measuring kind of growth, the replacement for the growth indicator here. And again, since the current year's juniors don't have a previous test record since 7th grade prior to the pandemic, what we're going to do is compare current year juniors performance to last year's junior performance and see in all these different subgroups how that performance has changed, increased, and then schools will receive points if they've made improvements for each of those subgroups compared to last year. So the next slide just shows a quick highlight of where that fits in. It's that 20% typical portion that's allocated to growth in most years, and that will just simply change over to subgroup improvement for traditional high schools this year. The next element that we looked at for 9-12 was another one that we collected data on last year. This was the diploma seals for biliteracy, the arts, civics education. We met with the technical advisory committees. This data seemed good. We'd like to propose that it be included in the traditional college career readiness indicator. The alternative, AATAC, didn't feel that this was something that was going to show up a lot for them. And they didn't feel like it was points that they were going to collect anyways, and probably wasn't really necessary on their side. So we'd like to propose it just for the typical or traditional 9-12 model. And what that will look like is similar to the FAFSA. So that one can count for either college readiness or career readiness. And the weighting of the point is at a 0.5, which is similar to filling out the FAFSA, is similar to getting on the career readiness side a workplace credential. Everyone felt like that would probably be an appropriate weight and placement for those, so schools could use them in either one. And then next, a quick review of the CCRI. There were a few elements that we anticipated with the phasing out of AZ Merit that we're going to change. And then we made some similar adjustments to work keys kind of on the career side to mirror what we're doing there. And what we can see with ACT, or excuse me, AZ Merit, the change from AZ Merit to ACT, schools previously in 2021, 2022, last year, had the opportunity to earn CCRI points for students who demonstrated proficiency on the state assessment. And so what we're doing this year is we're proposing to just replace that proficiency measure on the state assessment instead of being AZ Merit, move to ACT. What that does, however, is it kind of has a ripple effect. Schools were also able to receive points in addition to AZ Merit for ACT. And last year's cut scores, as you can see, they fell kind of right in the middle of the proficiency range for what we're awarding points right now. The TAC groups wanted to make sure that it wasn't a double dipping thing where it's like, hey, you got proficient on the state test and you got the same score on ACT. And so what we're proposing is to award a higher level of, or a higher threshold. If they hit highly proficient, they can earn those additional points that show they've kind of reached it. And we felt that was somewhat parallel to what it was in the past. We had the AZ merit component and then achieving a different level of proficiency on ACT. So we hope that'll be useful and keep the CCRI data pretty similar year to year. We were proposing a similar adjustment to the work keys component. This shows up on the career readiness side. And typically what it's been is schools can earn points if they meet the threshold of silver. The adjustment would just be to kind of mirror what it looks like on ACT, where if they reach higher levels of proficiency, then they'd be able to earn some additional tiered points there. This, our alternative group felt would be really beneficial for them. They feel like the work keys is a real clear representation of a lot of the work that they do with those students who are off track to graduate, and allows them to demonstrate proficiency in both academic and career focused areas. And then the next section of updates really are not a substantive change to the business rules or the models. It's just a reworking of the document to try and make it a little more user friendly, a little bit easier to use. I have to give a ton of credit to the people who preceded me here, Wendy Davey, Jen Fletcher, who did so much work in creating this document, getting the indicators worded and clearly explained. Like I said, it's been mostly a reorganization, and I do want to give a shout out to Sean and to Jen Fletcher on our technical advisory committee. Their suggestion was this first one on the overview documents. You know, they pointed out that a lot of the users of the business rules in the A3F system are not going to be the technical data people that are sitting and running calculations and figuring out numerators and denominators and all that stuff. But building principals, community members, members of the board and our leadership team, and people who need to understand the process, but don't need to necessarily dig into the numbers. So we've put a section in the first about 10 pages or so that is an abbreviated overview of what each indicator measures, what its goal is, how it's supposed to, you know, key things to remember about it. You know, the proficiency, it says you got to make sure and get your 95%, for example. And then an overview document of kind of the life cycle of A through F with each of the key timelines and deadlines. Just right up front, you can kind of take the first 10 pages of the business rules now, pull them out and use them as a quick reference manual before getting into the technical section. And then after that one, the feel of it is going to look a lot more like a reference document. Currently, they exist kind of as a narrative, right? It explains the whole process and it goes through it. So you'll see color-coded sections. The idea was to have everything that was needed to understand that component within that section, without having to reference other sections of the document. With a few key things, we tried to capture in each of those sections the intent of each of the indicators, as much as we had, you know, comments from public meetings with the state board, statute, those things, so we could all have a conversation with a common understanding of here's why this is in here, here's why it's important, here's the discussion around it, as well as a section with quick updates, anything that changed during the current year. So for a lot of our people who are using it, they're going to have a lot of familiarity with it as well, but they can access updates for the current year, and then who's included and the calculations for each of the elements. Another ease of use change that we're going to make just to kind of increase transparency and make sure that we can validate code and data on our side is the way we're going to report the EL numbers. We've always transformed the EL data in order to get an appropriate mean. It's a data set that when it comes back has a really long tail with a lot of outliers as far as, you know, there's a handful of schools that are just really knocking it out of the park with ELs. And when we don't remove those outliers, it shifts the average and makes it almost impossible for other schools to hit the targets. So the transformation is really important. We'll continue under the hood to remove the outliers, calculate a representative average, but we're just going to report that back in numbers that schools can connect to the actual students they had. So Typically in the past, you know, if they had 40 students who reclassified out of a total of 100 ELs, they might see a number like, you know, 63.2, which made it hard for them to validate, like, is ADE getting the right calculation here? Says 40, it says 100. Did we actually get 40% of our kids? It's just a check on our processes, and it makes it a little bit easier for school leaders to look forward to the next year and say, if this is where we were this year in terms of kids that are here, where do we need to be next year? And in terms of the statewide average as well. So that'll just look a little simpler. And then the final point, and I apologize, I feel like I'm talking really, really fast. And
No, you're good. We're listening just as fast.
We're proposing a slight change to the 95% tested rule. This is one that, in the analysis as we were putting together the business rules, we discovered a concern that there was, the metric is designed to, you know, in statute, we need to impose a penalty for schools that test fewer than 95% of their students. So it's designed to combine how well students did on the test, in addition to how many of those kids you tested. And we discovered that there was a concern happening where enrollment patterns had kind of crept their way into that. And so what you can see here is in each of those little plots, you've got schools that are exactly the same number of kids tested, same exact scores. Your blue line on the top is schools that have really high stability. All their kids are there the full year. The yellow line is schools where 2/3 of the kids were there the full year. The red line, only 1/3 of students were there the full year. And what you can see is at any point on those lines, if you had less stability with your student population, everything else equal, you were going to get dinged a lot harder on those points. When we looked into it, we got a couple of slides to show kind of why that was happening. It boiled down to, if you take school A and school B, these schools are identical, 100 kids at each school. They tested 90 of them, so they were a little bit short of where they needed to be. And we'll just say for ease of use, every single kid got proficient at that they tested. What happened is, in order to impose that penalty, we put the gray portion back in and say, okay, you tested 90, you got to get to 95. So we're putting 5 kids back into your denominator. Essentially, those kids are zeros. What that represented, you only get points based on the full academic year students who are in red. So for school A, it becomes those 5 kids are out of 30, whereas for school B, it's 5 kids out of 90. So the hit is a lot smaller on school B than school A. The adjustment that we're proposing would essentially just consider them separately. So we need the full academic year for stability in terms of measuring, how much impact did you have on the kiddos. But we constrain the percent tested only to the first day of the test window. So, A through F is designed to be a measure of school quality, and that is one of the things that a good school should do, is test all their kids. So we changed that, essentially the slope of that line to say, how many kids did you have on test day? Of those, how many did you test? If you get your 95, that we're going to multiply times your score, and those things will then be uniform across all schools, and the enrollment kind of comes out of there. The other nice thing that this does, in the past, we've always held schools that didn't get all their kids tested. We said, okay, you got to make it to at least 95, and we're backfilling that denominator 95. If we keep the denominator at 95, this also creates a little bit, you can get more than 100% in that percent tested multiplier, which means that a school who goes kind of that extra mile and gets 97, 98, 99% of their students can have a few additional points. And we hope that creates an incentive to pick up some of those kids that are the hardest to test and maybe not going to do great. We still want to know how they're doing. It's still important. We don't want them to fall through the cracks. So that can add a few points into their proficiency score. And that is the end of my lightning fast presentation there. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Sean. Members, any questions? Yeah, Dr. Hager.
Not so much a question, just a comment. I really thank you for having the business rules out like this and how just readable and usable that document is. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Clay, please.
I've talked to a lot of superintendents and principals since this has come out, and they're very, very pleased. Now they know that there is an azimuth and they understand why things are happening. In the past, it was explained, it's explained like this. Everything went in the black box, and then on the day of, boom, there's a score, and no one, sometimes it was wrong, sometimes it was right, and now we have to scramble and do all these things. But now you're making it so instead of it's reactive, now this makes everyone very proactive, especially the educational leaders. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I mean, I would just, I think last year we literally internally were trying to create some crazy spreadsheet ourselves and then even questions, and so proactive in nature, both to ensure schools have the ability to kind of go their letter grade is, but also to really on the back end as served on the appeals committee, to really hopefully address or mitigate any concerns before we begin to them. So just like really great job.
Thank you. Member Gervais.
I'll echo all those comments. If I have a couple of comments and questions. I think I shared with you before, I had a brief stint in ADE, and my sole job there, was really to get the no telephone waiver pass, which is where I got a huge crash course on accountability. So I'm going to ask some maybe not normal questions. But I also want to share with you and the superintendent a phone call that I got. So I was also part of the team that launched AZ School of Workers, which, by the way, thank you for keeping them up and running. I'm so proud of that project. One day, Constituent Services sent me a phone call, and it was mom who had just moved to Avondale from Tucson. And she couldn't understand why the school she left was I don't even remember what they were. And so I challenge you to think, I get why we need a TAC committee and all that stuff. I've had the pleasure of those meetings. But how do we explain this to parents, to policymakers, and to the press, right? We always call it the 3 Ps. I could not explain to that mom why. I mean, yeah, it was about SGPs and growth and all, and that was a really frustrating experience for me, especially because the whole intent of letter grades, once I was at the legislature and the report cards is to bring transparency to parents. And the fact that I couldn't explain that to her, still, obviously, it's been 10 years and that phone call still sits in my head as something that I think we should strive for. And it appears to me that the whole system is really more about how do we want to incentivize, what things do we want, what behaviors do we want to incentivize in school? If that's kind of the philosophy of our letter grades now, rather than saying, what does an A school look like? Which is a totally different philosophy. Let me ask one question. Is the bottom quartile still in statute? Is that gone now? Did I miss something? Or do we, because I mean, originally when letter grades came out, that was one of the most critical components, and that was what we tried to get in the no telephone waiver, was the inclusion of the bottom quartile.
President Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, to my awareness, we don't have a statutory requirement for a specific metric to align to the bottom quartile. Yeah, so I don't think it's explicitly in there now.
I'm hoping Aaron will look for that for me. Yeah, because I mean, the whole point of that was, rather than just looking at subgroups, every school has a bottom quartile regardless of how they're made up. And my second question was, thank you for the FAE stuff, because FAE is something that's been concerning to me. And that's why I go back to the philosophy of our letter grade system, because I understand from a school perspective why they only want to measure students who are there for a full academic year. But we also have decades of research that tells us that the kids who are not mobile, who stay put for a year, are going to do a lot better, which is exactly what your slides show. So it brings me to the question of, how do we advocate for the kids that are struggling the most, the kids that are not there for a full academic year, the kids that are mobile? Those are the kids I feel like we almost, they're not being counted in our accountability system at all. And that's also something that I've been thinking about for years. So I just want to throw that out to you. I'm just looking at all my questions about how to, some of it I guess we can go through at a later time. I'll probably be asking you a lot of questions about, because it was the question I got from the US Department of Ed every single meeting, was what % of students are included? And I didn't even realize it at that time, because I was newer to accountability, that you can have an A school that 90% of their students' test scores are counted, you can have an A school that only 60% of their students are. And that's not apples to apples. I didn't even mean that unintentionally. So I want to throw that out too, because I think that's something that's important to transparency as well, in order to really compare what an A school is and how that's meaningful. I probably have more questions, but.
And Member Kravickas, President Core, we did look in statute, and there is not the bottom quartile anymore. The different components in statute for achievement profiles and multiple measures of academic performance, academic progress on assessments, academic progress on English language learner assessments, progress towards college and career readiness, academic progress on assessments for other things, and then multiple measures of academic. So those are the statute.
But we're not precluded from having something similar.
We would have to look into that further. I mean, those are the kind of 6 items that statute lays out that have to be included in achievement profiles. There's also some language in statute about kind of what goes into the AIDRA things. We'd have to look into that a little bit more.
Thank you, Erin. Subgroup performance, I think, is just it's a very important issue to me. One of the things I liked about the bottom quartile, again, is remember the old days of AYP, under No Child Left Behind. And right, I hear lots of schools will be like, oh, I didn't make AYP because of SPED. I didn't make AYP. And the bottom quartile kind of took care of that. It's just like whoever made up the kids that were most struggling in your school is where we wanted a laser-like focus. So I'd like to bring back that topic for discussion.
Thank you, Member Kravickas. Any other questions or comments?
Dr. Core, if I could just add one thing.
Yeah, please.
One thing that Sean didn't mention in his presentation, but deserves recognition, is Sean and his team also included the formulas in each of the sections so that schools could use the exact formulas the department uses to determine their own letter grades prior to letter grades being released. And for those of us who've been in the field for a long time, been asking for that since day one. So that's a really important inclusion that I know as we shopped around that item, folks were really excited about.
Thank you, Executive Director Ross, and I know you were active and enthusiastic collaborator in this process. So kudos to the Sean and Sean show for sure. With that, do I have a motion to approve the statewide 2022-2023 A to F accountability business rules for traditional K-8 and 9-12 schools, 9-12 alternative schools, and AOI schools as outlined above in the executive summary, and the business rules document for the 2022-2023 as presented in the supporting documents, and the college and career readiness index spreadsheets for the 2022-2023 school year as presented in the supporting documents? Do I have such a motion? Member Meyerson, do I have a second?
Second.
Member Kravickas, thank you. Any additional conversation or discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye. 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 Any opposed, same sign. Do we have anyone with us? No, okay.
Dr. Core, Member Clark, and Dr. Robbins have both let me.
Okay, I want to make sure their voice was heard. It was there to be heard. Okay, but I do believe motion passes. Sean, did you have a final comment?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned earlier. We will also, the document, the business rules that are there are a combined version that have all 3 right now. It's kind of a huge dinosaur size 75-page thing. We will condense that with the approval down to the 9-12, K-8 and alternative that people usually get as well. So I just want to make sure.
Thank you so much. And again, kudos.
Could I make one comment?
Yeah, please.
Should we get a copy of that when that occurs also? That would be great.
Member Myerson, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Going to move us on to general session item 5C. Each of the next 3 items are information only. There'll be votes anticipated on these items. And 5C is an update on rulemaking procedures for AAC R7-2 602.02 Arizona Teacher Leader Professional Standards. Director Ross.
Updating the board today is one of our rock star employees, Federico Yanes, who I know many of you have met, and they'll be providing that update.
Fantastic, please.
Good morning, or actually good afternoon, say President Core, Lieutenant members of the board. So before you guys update, just really quick on the teacher professional standards. He's not here, but I wanted to Bruce the plan, the educator recruitment team at AE for providing us with these standards, as we are working to engage some stakeholders on feedback and moving these forward. We held a public hearing on April 6th. We had a form sent out to various stakeholder groups that's been open since March 21st. And we are looking to close this rule by our May meeting. Open to any questions from you guys.
Any questions or concerns, direction to be given? I think your first crack at the podium went quite smoothly. Thank you.
And I'll be brief on the next one.
Hold on, President Core has to.
I'll just call the item and turn it. So I'm going to move us on to 5D. That is an update on rulemaking procedures for AAC R7-2902, independent accounting responsibility. Director Ross.
Thank you, Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. Again, we have Federico Llanes to provide us an update.
Please, Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. The independent accounting responsibility legislation that passed in the previous session just includes the county treasurer's office a little bit earlier in the process, gives them the ability to approve and deny schools before they reach the state board for approval. And then it also requires that school districts, when they file their independent accounting responsibility plans, they file it with the county superintendent ahead of time as well, along with ADE. This rule hadn't been updated since the 1980s, so we're also looking at getting some feedback to make sure that we're legally complying with how the statute has changed over the course of the past couple decades. We've gotten some feedback just recently from the Auditor General's office, and then similar to the previous rule, we also have a stakeholder forum that is currently open, and then we held a public hearing on April 6th, and we're looking to close it in May.
Fantastic. Any questions or comments, Deputy Director?
President Core, Superintendent Moore, members of the board, just one additional component as well. The feedback that Rico mentioned from the Auditor General's office is not reflected in this draft. That came in just at the end of last week. So we'll be working to continue to update that, provide updates to the board. But we anticipate that there will be a change based on the feedback that they provided in the package that will come for the closing in May.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any comments, questions, concerns, or direction from the board? None. You're 2 for 2. Thank you. Appreciate it. Move us on to 5E, presentation and discussion on the State Board of Education's Arizona Ascending Graduate Initiative. A new name to a topic we've chatted about before. Director Ross, Executive Director Ross.
Dr. Core, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. I also won't draw attention to how Rico said the 1980s as if it were 100 years ago.
I have some ties from the 80s, so.
Thank you, Dr. Core. So we, in the previous meeting, introduced a project that the board is very excited about. At the time, titled Portrait of a Graduate. It's a mea culpa. We have since learned that that name has some political pieces attached to it nationally that are not in any way reflective of what this project is. And so we have changed the name to the Arizona Ascending Graduate Initiative. And I just want to sort of reset for everyone what that initiative is. At the board's call, board staff is reaching out to stakeholders across the state to identify what they believe are the core qualities of a Arizona graduate. We are going to use those qualities to build a document that acts as a lens through which the board has codified its views and will examine its important work during the year, including obviously initiatives that impact students A through F and some of those larger initiatives. It is not intended in any way to for school districts to adopt this document. It is not the intent in any way to subvert local control or to have this this Arizona Ascending Graduate Initiative impact local schools unless they would like to see the project, the process or the document itself. So we just wanted to take a moment to really stress that this is very much a process for the board to build a lens by which it examines its important work. But as of course, everything that's done on the board, it's done publicly, and it's done inviting a wide range of stakeholder input. In fact, and Jessica, if you wouldn't mind bringing up the survey. Jessica, who also deserves a huge shout out in the 8th ref item for all of her great work, she helped us put together a very brief survey asking folks what words or short phrases they think of when they think of an Arizona graduate. And that Jessica is working on disseminating that very short survey to the entire state. We're being very cognizant to have that survey go out to more than just educational stakeholders, though obviously those stakeholders as well, so that we hear from every part of the public. To quote Dr. Clay, we want the ranchers, we want the people in the nursing homes, we want early child care providers, we want home educated folks, we want everybody across the spectrum. And so that's all being done now. In a future meeting, we will present the findings from that survey, and that will be the jumping off point for the work moving forward.
Thank you, Executive Director Ross. I know that I had heard from my friend and the fiery superintendent of Union School District, Gina Thompson. She actually goes by that, the fiery superintendent. Her concern was a lot of work is being done in Yukon that I think can inform us at the state level. And her concern was that somehow that would be subsumed or overwhelmed by something this board is going to do. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I know work is being done across the state, great work that can inform this board's work. We want to support and amplify the work being done at the local level, not in any way replace it. So just wanted to share that and see if there are any other comments, questions, concerns, or direction from the board. Okay, thank you so much. Then I will move us on to 5F, presentation and discussion regarding legislative affairs. The board may take action to support, oppose, or remain neutral on specific legislative proposals. Executive Director Ross, anything to share this one?
President Corr, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, I will turn this item over to Deputy Wonders.
Thank you, President Corr, Superintendent Horn, members of the board. We are on day 106 of the 100-day session. The timeline we were right, I think last time we had a check-in, we were right at the end of committees. So once committees have ended, there's kind of a few last steps and bills moving through the legislature. So they'll be flipped to the other chamber for passage up to the governor's office for signature, letting go into effect without signature or veto, as well as moving to the budget conversation. Per request, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of macro where we're at with the budget right now. In terms of the bills that have been sent up to the executive, there have been about 156 bills, 93 of those have been chaptered, 63 vetoed. For those bills that were working their way through the chambers that had appropriations, those by and large will stop at this point and be folded into the budget conversation. The budget conversation is typically negotiated between the executive legislative leadership and then work through the body to get to a budget. Just for some framing on kind of the initial point for that conversation, the executive had released their budget at the beginning of session. Some of the major items in that proposal were $330 million for building renewal grants, increasing the base support level by 200 million, or about 3%, about 170 million in new school construction, $240 million programs for tuition scholarships, repealing the universal ESA expansion, 20 million for dual enrollment, as well as a number of other items. That kind of frames the executive starting point for these negotiations. We don't know, as legislative staff for the board, where those negotiations are at this point, but anticipate that that is a foundational component for what will, some of those will be in the budget, some of those will be out of the budget. That's typically how it goes. For bills that have had a budgetary impact, some of the larger ones that you may have seen press about or heard from this legislative session, there have been proposals around teacher salary increases, dual enrollment. There's a $10 million proposal for establishing active threat response pilot program, about a $45 million program for eliminating the in-demand list for some of the CTE programs, the way they get 9th and 14th or 13th grade funding. There's also a proposal for creating a state funding formula for districts to opt out of bonds and overrides in exchange for picking up charter additional assistance. Those have all stopped at this point, but may potentially be things that would be part of that budget conversation at this point. I think that is kind of the general update on where we're at with session. We haven't seen a lot of bills moving. This past week, we had kind of legislative spring break, neither chamber met, and there have been some changes in membership that you may have seen as well. One thing for members to also be aware of, there have been a few presentations that folks may find interesting. We could send those out after this. There have been proposals or presentations by the Auditor General staff on some of the work that they've done on federal COVID relief spending, as well as district classroom spending. And then there's been some presentations by JLBC on kind of the way that the student funding formula works for districts. I'd be happy to answer any more specific questions that members may have. Want to provide kind of that general overview of where we're at in session right now.
Thank you, Deputy Director Munters, and yes, setting out those presentations, I think would the members would find that interesting. Any questions, comments, or concerns from the board? All right, bring us home a budget soon. I'm going to move us on to item 6, on a call to the public. This is the time to comment on items on the consent portion of the enforcement actions, and consistent with our earlier call to the public, all speakers will be asked to limit their comments to 2 minutes. Director Ross, have we received any requests to speak for this session?
President Corr, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, we do not have any requests for this call to the public.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll move us to the consent agenda for certification enforcement actions. If it is the desire of this board, it would be my request that we take the consent agenda item for enforcement actions as a single motion. Does anyone object and want any of these cases removed? Okay, seeing none, then we will in fact take a single motion. Do I have a motion to approve items 7A1 through 7A5 and 7B1 through 7B3?
I'll make that.
So moved.
Vice President Haney
And I'll second.
and Dr. Hagerman second. Any comments? Further discussion? Okay, then, all in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. I'll now move us on to call to the public, item 8. This is the time to comment on items on the general session portion of enforcement actions. And once again, all speakers will be limited to 2 minutes. Director Ross, have we received any requests to speak for this call?
President Corr, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, we have one speaker, Walter Halliburton, who is joining us virtually.
Okay.
Executive Director Ross, can you just join us and give us a minute for connection?
President Corr, just since Mr. Halliburton may not have been with us earlier in the meeting, maybe a reminder of the length of time.
Okay, thank you, Sean.
So I'm here. Can you all hear me all right?
You know what, we can indeed, we both see you and hear you, and we've asked speakers today to limit their comments to 2 minutes, and you can begin whenever you're ready to go.
Okay. I'm going to restate once again that I'm innocent of.
Mr. Halliburton may not have been with us earlier in the meeting, maybe a reminder of the length of time.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you, Sean.
Okay.
I'm here. Can you all hear me all right?
Hang on a
You
second.
know what, we can indeed, we both see you and hear you, and we've asked speakers today
Oh my goodness, I apologize for that. I had my YouTube feed and, you know.
Okay, yeah, no
I
no worries.
apologize if there was a bunch of feedback in there somewhere.
No, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I'd like to restate once again that I'm innocent of the allegations before me. I never masturbated in a Zoom call, nor did I access porn on a district computer. I have over 20 people who have come to my defense and continue to offer their support and encouragement. More importantly, they can attest to my character, my behavior, and my values, which count for way more than the inconclusive 41-second video that shows only my head and shoulders. I even took and passed a lie detector test to confirm and provide more evidence of my innocence. This evidence screams my innocence. With that said, I understand that the board would like to use the conclusions of the PPAC to help them reach their decision, but there is a problem with these conclusions. The decision to revoke my license was based on an incorrect count. As evidence, or as is evident based on the PPAC transcript my lawyer filed for this hearing. The actual decision about whether my behavior was unprofessional was an inconclusive 4-4 vote with one member not voting. A member of the opposing council incorrectly expressed that it was a 5-4 decision against me and the PPAC trusted her. This decision shaped and influenced all the other decisions about what should be done with my license. This is clearly evident that proper procedures were not followed and there was not a clear and conclusive decision from the PPAC. We can argue back and forth for hours about what was going through the minds of the PPAC members as they were making their decisions back in February. But in reality, we will never get that opportunity to go back in time. In the interest of fair and just treatment, we can clear up these questions by sending this case back to the PPAC committee for their definitive answers, and that should greatly help you decide on a correct course of action. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that our only,
Dr. Core, that concludes this call to the public.
thank you. I will move us on to item 9 on our agenda. This is the general session certification enforcement actions. 9A is the presentation, discussion of possible action to approve negotiated settlement agreements for Amanda Donajakowski, I'm going to say, and Robert Vivian. I would like to take both these in a single motion unless there's objection from one of my colleagues. Do I have a motion to approve items 9A1 through 9A2? So moved. Superintendent Horn, do I have a second?
Second.
Vice President Haley, thank you. Any conversation? Discussion? All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. I'll then move us on to 9B, presentation, discussion, and possible action on the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and recommendation of the Professional Practices Advisory Committee to revoke the certificates of Walter Alumberta, case number C 2021-006925. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendations of the PPAC to revoke the teaching certificates of Walter Alumberta for a period of 5 years and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Dr. Hagerman, do I have a second?
Second.
Dr. Clay, any discussion? Comments? All in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. 9C is the presentation, discussion, and possible action on the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommendations of the Professional Practices Advisory Committee to issue a letter of censure with conditions to Benjamin Wheeler, case number C 2022-000381. Do I have a motion to adopt the findings of fact, conclusion of law, and recommendations of the PPAC to issue a letter of censure to Benjamin Wheeler with the condition of successful completion of a board-approved anger management or domestic violence counseling, and furnish a letter of completion to the board within 1 year, and that all states and territories be so notified? Do I have such a motion?
So moved.
Dr. Hagerman, do I have a second?
Second.
Superintendent Horn. Any discussion? Conversation? Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. All right, item 10, our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, May 22nd. We'll likely still be here, the new digs, what's our?
President Gore, Superintendent Horn, members of the board, I am super excited to announce that we should, big asterisk, but we should be third floor boardroom with the dais and all of the accoutrement. What we're waiting on is a railing to get installed, but we're very hopeful. We are planning for the May meeting and meetings moving forward to be on the third floor.
That is super exciting. I believe I'm the only one of this board who has been actually in that, our boardroom.
I believe so.
Well, okay, yeah. I know Superintendent Warren might have some experience there. Too. No?
Yeah.
This building,
Yeah.
I haven't been there, no.
Any announcements, anything for the good of the order before I adjourn us?
President Gore, if I could just two
Yeah,
things,
please.
board members asked me to mention in this section. We are looking at bringing some new areas to the board meetings of discussion that are of interest to board members. And so I have a preview that when we're talking about college matriculation and attainment, we had a little preview of that with that FAFSA presentation, but there will be more to come. And then a focus now and moving into next fiscal year on teacher recruitment and retention, learning more about the teacher shortage and some areas, some schools and some organizations that are having real success. So those are going to be forthcoming in future meetings.
Thank you so much. And with that, I will adjourn our meeting.